Taping? Oh, we're not using it?
Yeah, we're on.
Oh, just, you're all
Much
set?
better color than last year, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the July quarterly meeting for the Board of Finance. Would everyone please rise? I'm going to ask Mr. Bob Mayer, our newest, oldest member, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. All right, tonight's agenda. Item number one, we're going to hear an update from the purchasing director on potential revisions to the current purchasing policy and procedures. Number two, we're going to consider and act upon a request from the Board of Education to fund a multi-year roof warranty program for school roofs, to consider a special board appropriation for such a program. This was tabled from a prior meeting, and I have some more information on this tonight. Item number three, to review the current status of the fiscal year budget as of the end of the year, June 30th, 2011. These are, as I'm sure the fiscal officer will note, preliminary numbers. Item number four, to review the current status of the town's pension funds, seeing representatives, we hope, from the pension boards. And item number five, to hear a report from the subcommittee that we put together that's working with our auditors on the Fairfield Metro Center project. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome back to the board a former and now current colleague, Mr. Bob Mayer. He's taking Mr. Tetra's place on our board for the remainder of this term. And funny enough, as I commented at Bob's swearing-in ceremony at the Board of Selectmen meeting, when Mike moved on to greener pastures, I was under the impression that our meetings might be shorter. That won't be the case now, I'm assured, with Mr. Mayer rejoining the board, and we're very happy to have him back. He served the town very well for his full term last time, and Bob, I know the board, all the members expressed their appreciation for you coming back, and our goodwill towards working with you again for the next few months. So, all right. With that, let's turn to item number one. Mr. Hiller and Ms. Holland, please come on up. All right, just to refresh the board's memory on this item, you recall that I had notified the board that I was receiving some information from Mr. Hiller, Ms. Holland, the town librarian, as well as the superintendent in schools, regarding our current purchasing policy, and the fact that our new financial system put in just a little over a year and a half ago or so was allowing increased reporting and a different way of doing transactions through that system, which was causing both opportunities and concerns for the purchasing process. And it had been quite some time since the purchasing policies had been reviewed for effectiveness as well as for efficiency, and for allowing the town employees to work efficiently, not waste a lot of time, as well as allow them to take advantage of purchasing opportunities. So I started this with Mr. Flato and Mr. Hiller quite some time ago. Mr. Tetros carried this on through his administration, working with the purchasing director and Mr. Hiller, as well as the other town bodies, to review this policy. So we're not prepared tonight, or you're not prepared tonight, to recommend a new policy, but you did want to update us on what the status of it is.
That's correct. Thank
So,
you.
please, go right ahead.
Mr. Chairman, before Ms. Holland begins,
I
could
guess
I
not.
just
Go ahead,
interrupt
Mr.
you? I think the board should be aware, first off, that under the charter, clearly the Board of Finance has the authority to set the purchasing regulations for the town. These were this came out of the charter revision of 1997, and this board in, I believe, November of '98, last adopted policy. Those policies have not changed since that time, and I think what we're attempting to do is to bring these policies into the 21st century, among other things, to comply with certain things that the new software brings us, and also to bring us, when I say into the 21st century, I think the internet also has provided some opportunities in the purchasing process, several aspects of it that I think Ms. Holland's prepared to discuss also, that should be. But likely at the September meeting, there would be a policy in which the board would adopt or revise those policies that were adopted in 1998.
Thank you, Mr. Hiller.
Thank you.
No.
Several months ago, I started a process of looking at the existing purchasing policies and to see where we were missing some opportunities, where I believed there was room for improvement, what I believed was working well, and what we could refine and fine-tune. I have met with a number of department managers throughout the town. I've met with the superintendent of schools and with the first selectman to listen to what their business requirements are, so that when we do revise something, it meets all of the business needs, and hopefully will get everybody most of what they want in addition. In addition, I've also interviewed purchasing professionals from other school districts and other towns to get a sense of how they operate, what their policies are, what their practices are, and just to find out a little bit more about how business is conducted, not to benchmark them, Fairfield against them, but to start and look at what some of the best practices are, more globally speaking. To date, I would say that discussions have been productive. They've been with a number of department heads, and as I said, with folks from the Board of Ed. In principle, I believe we've agreed on everything. We have a couple of issues that we need to fine-tune and gather a little bit more data, one of them being some of the limits that we're going to propose. Some of that still needs to be refined. And then, of course, everything will require review by council to make sure that the policies that we're proposing fully comply with the principles of public bidding and with all the rules, regulations, and antitrust laws and so forth. And I believe we can have everything ready for your review at your September meeting. So I ask to be put on the agenda for that discussion.
Thank you. Do we have questions from board members? Mr. Brockfeld, and then I'll go to Mr. Bolito.
Ms. Holland, thanks very much. And
You're welcome.
I've had the pleasure of working with you on something, so I know you're on top of this. I'm going to steal Mr. Kiley's thunder. I apologize to my committee chairman in the subcommittee we're working together on. One of the, steal his thunder in particular, but it's more of a general question. One of the things that Kevin asks every time we have something like this come up is he uses computers as an example. It appears that there's state rules that require us to buy certain things, particularly technology, through state lists or qualified state agents. And I remember it was, I think, either Mr. Leslie or someone from the Board of Ed came forward and talked about computers we were purchasing. And Kevin, who knows more in his fingernails than I know my body about all the specifications, asked him what it was, and he described the Pentium this and the hard drive and so forth, and then told us we were paying $1,100 per computer. And I saw his mind quickly moving along, and then he said, you know, we buy these for my business all the time, and we have specifications that are far better. We pay $699 because we pick up the phone and call J&R Music World, tell them we want to buy 10 of these, you know, how much will you sell them to us for? So are we constrained? That's my question. Are we terribly constrained by where we can buy things? I mean, it strikes me that, you know, you mentioned the internet as being, or I think Paul did, about, you know, there's got to be so many things we buy that we could just do on our own without having to go to these state-mandated vendors.
Okay. We're not required to go to state suppliers. We are able to use contracts that are bid by the state of Connecticut and by the General Services Administration, which is essentially the purchasing branch for the federal government. We are able to use their contracts to purchase technology. And because everything has been, so to speak, pre-bid, oftentimes that's where we go. We do bid technology on our own from time to time, or when we're making some very, very large purchases, primarily for the Board of Ed. And we've gotten very competitive pricing. I remember the question coming up during the budget hearings, and what my department did, I don't have it with me.
Okay.
And so I'm going from memory. But what we did was we took a computer that was available from Best Buy. And, I apologize, one of our recently specified computers. And we went to Best Buy, I don't remember the other outlets that we went to, but basically, someone in my department just did some shopping online. And what we found was that to deliver the computers the way we require them to be configured was not available on a retail basis at a competitive price. And in part, I think it may be because of the way we're configuring them with certain software or whatever. I just don't remember the details. But there were certain things that simply weren't available on a retail basis.
Okay. So I'm just finish up.
Please.
So then I have one quick follow-up. So the answer, you're answering my question affirmatively, which is that this is on your agenda. You recognize that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
okay, I appreciate that. I would imagine that would be part of any new policy that we would always go out and check around, quote unquote, before we.
At one point, we had enjoyed a waiver for technology. What we were finding was that we would no sooner release specifications for a computer, and 3 weeks later, when we opened the bids, it was already out of date. And it was problematic because bidders just didn't know what to bid. Having the flexibility to use the state contracts and the federal contracts, which are continually updated, has been helpful.
Okay. And then a unrelated but follow-up is the other thing I've heard a lot about in the budget hearings is the Board of Ed and the town working together to buy things that they both use,
Yes.
as opposed, I assume garbage bags, toilet paper, whatever it may be. Is that something that's on the agenda to be looked into?
We've been doing that since I got to the town. We have combined bids. We do snow removal, lawn mowing, custodial products. There are a number of products and
Okay.
services that, where we have some common interests, and we believe we can benefit from economies of scale. We bid them. Contractually, it's easier, too. We don't have to remember who did what and when
Right.
for renewals or rebidding.
Okay. I appreciate it.
Are you good? Yep. Go to Mr. Lino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Twig, as part of this bidding policy and the purchasing policy, are you investigating the possibility of leasing certain equipment, or is that out of your realm?
We haven't. We can lease off state contracts. We do our copiers off state contracts, but we haven't looked closely at whether to buy or lease specific pieces of equipment. That would be a bidding strategy or a purchasing strategy that we would use based on a particular situation.
So it would be in your purview, it's just not something that you've looked at particularly in detail at this point.
That's correct.
That's accurate, okay.
Yes.
Going forward, I would certainly like to see that element covered, because even though interest rates are still low, they may not stay low forever with the nation's credit rating going in the toilet. So it might be a good time to take a new look at leasing and seeing where maybe we can, save some money in terms of maintenance, in terms of replacement costs through leasing. The other question I have for you was, you mentioned that you'd spoken to department heads. Have you spoken to all of the department heads?
I haven't spoken to all of them. I've talked to our biggest customers.
Who would be, which ones?
Public Works, the wastewater treatment plant, Parks and Recreation, the library, police and fire,
Okay.
Board of Education.
and the Board of Education,
Right.
yes. I have talked to John Leslie, actually, yes. Yeah, several months ago. So we've tried to but we've tried to discuss this with the folks that present the most buying
Right.
the most bidding opportunities or make the most.
As you go
purchases.
forward, are you going to at least make a stop with all the department heads just to make sure that their particular department's needs are dealt with?
Yes, what I had hoped to do was to, within the next couple of weeks, after legal has reviewed everything, is to distribute the policy again to all department heads,
Right.
quite honestly, and get their response to it at that time. Fine tune it if we need to a little bit.
Right. Just want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity for feedback, because I know sometimes when you're putting together something of this complexity, you go to the biggest users, but sometimes some of the smaller departments or departments that maybe don't purchase as much, they might feel left out of the process.
Yes,
So we want
yes.
to make sure everybody's included and has the opportunity for feedback.
I agree.
All right, great. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up on Mr. Brockfeld's comments. I'm very glad to hear that we're not mandated by state statutes or to buy some state contracts, because frankly, that's what I've heard for the last 4 years. I keep hearing that, and Mr. Leslie is one of the guys that says it a lot, right? Now, I'm a little concerned when you say, well, we were looking online, and we can't buy the ones that are configured that way. One of the reasons we spent the money, I think, to hire an IT director, I would think would be to do just that. We can configure these computers in such a way where maybe they are a little cheaper. They're still effective. I mean, we are buying, big corporations are buying these computers online, and they're using them every day. So, I'm very interested to see the policies, and my question is, can we see, this is my business, so I wouldn't mind reading them ahead of time before the meeting if you're so inclined to share them that way,
The
policies.
Once we propose them?
Right.
Oh, yeah, they'll be included in your
Okay.
package prior to the
Okay.
board meeting, yes.
But, yeah, I think it's, a lot of times we impose certain things on the purchasing organization when your hands are tied by the people who are putting you in a box to go buy a computer that you can only buy from one guy. So that might be, there might be some wiggle room in there to push back to the organizations. I don't know. Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Kiley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening.
Good evening, Kevin.
You've been working on this for a couple months, and you've done a bunch of interviews, so that's great progress. Thank you. Is there a draft copy of the report that you can share with us so that we can review it and have some input earlier in the process?
If the chairman is agreeable, I'd be happy to do that. I don't have it with me, but I can make sure that you get it in advance. Yes.
Thank you.
A couple of things on this. One of the things I wanted to make sure before Twig came back with a proposed policy to the full board was that we didn't get into a he said, or he said, she said in front of the board. I wanted a collective policy that, as Rob pointed out, all the department heads, or at least the ones that had specific areas of concern, had the opportunity to review the policy. And while they may not all agree on what that policy is, at least their views were taken into consideration. Because at the end of the day, the department heads, Mr. Hiller, the first selectman, and Ms. Holland, they have to live within this framework. And what we continued to hear, what I continued to hear, was that as the current policy was being used, particularly with the new system, there were areas where things were falling through the cracks. Opportunities to save money might have been missed, or that our process was inefficient because of the policy. And it was the policy that was put in place a number of years ago. So it was nobody's fault. It's just the way it is. A few of the concepts that have been discussed have been raising the bid requirement amount. Right now, the bid requirement amount is $7,500. That was set back in 1998. What's the flexibility with that? Should that be means tested or COLA tested to move up a little bit? Another thing was putting controls around aggregated totals of amounts. And what does that mean? Well, right now, that $7,500 is unique to a specific purchase. So if I wanted to buy 5 things from Ken Brockfeld and not go out to bid, I could presumably break that bid into 5 different purchases of under $7,500. Now, I'm not saying that that's happening, but it could happen, right? And get around having to go out to that bid policy. So the question is, how do you put an aggregate stopgap in there? Maybe it's just a notification that at the end of the year, right, a report is printed that said, during this fiscal year, I bought this amount of services from Ken Brockfeld. So you know in aggregate how much has been acquired, something to that sort. The other area was a large concern, I know, for the Board of Education, was addressing the procurement of copyrighted curriculum. And, you know, the copyrighted curriculum that comes from specific publishing houses, where should it be bought specifically from that individual publishing house as opposed to through some third party? And what kind of discretion does the Education Administration have there? The opportunities for some consortium purchases, buying as part of buying groups, and does our policy allow for that, where there's several towns that team up and buy something in bulk together to allow quantity discounts that wouldn't be available to us? So all these things that I think, you know, Twig and Mr. Hiller and the various department heads and, you know, Dr. Title has been very involved in this. Those are some of the things that we're trying to address with this policy. So I will definitely make sure that when we have a draft that you feel can be circulated, that we can circulate it. Mr. DeWitt, I think it'd be very good to get your knowledge on this, given your experience in the
Absolutely.
business world on this, particularly, as well as everybody else's. So, are there any other questions, comments, concerns on this right now?
Just one quick
Please.
comment.
And
Do-
then I'm going to go to Mrs.
Oh,
Leclerc
I'm
right
sorry,
after.
did I jump in front of you?
Go ahead.
My company deals with the United States government all the time, and we have an audit and surveillance group that does nothing but audit POs. And we have a threshold, you know, the government doesn't want to know anything, I think it's $500,000. But they also randomly just pull a couple.
That's comforting.
Well, yeah. Well, but since we're a good.
COLA on that
All
would
right.
be,
Since we're such a good company, you know, it depends on your company reputation what that limit is, frankly. But every once in a while, they will pull a PO, a lower value PO, just to make sure that what Mr. Flynn's saying, you know, 7,500 10 times becomes real money, right? Is there any?
And by the way, that was an example. I'm
No,
not
no,
saying that's,
no, but that's a real-life example, right?
Right.
It really is. Do we have any audit body other than us, right, above your organization?
yes. The purchasing department is audited annually by the town's internal auditor.
Okay.
And I'm happy to report that for the last, I believe, 2 years, definitely the past year, there were no comments.
Excellent.
There were no
Excellent.
recommendations, there were no comments,
As we would
there were no
expect, nothing less
criticisms,
from you,
so
Ms.
it's-
Holland.
yeah, thank you.
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Leclerc.
I just had a question. Over the years, we've issued a few bid waivers for energy and things like that. Will you bring those with you in September? Are you relooking at those policies, or will they need to be updated in conjunction with this?
We presently have a standing waiver of bid for consumable energy products, which covers electricity, gasoline, heating, fuel, you know, both oil and natural gas and those consumable energy products. And having that waiver in place has been extremely helpful in helping us to get good prices, because we buy on the futures market. And so we time the market when we see something good. The policy that I'll propose continues that standing waiver for those products.
Mr. Brown?
Just a point of clarification for me. Do all bids over $7,500 then go through your department?
They do.
And then does your department determine the winner of all bids over $7,500?
We generally work in conjunction with the department that is requesting the product or the service. For instance, we're not engineers. And so when engineering wants to purchase a duplicating machine or a copier, we work with them to develop the specification and then to review the bids received and any alternates that may have been proposed. In the case of, well, we recently bid science textbooks. We worked on that in conjunction with folks over at the Board of Ed. We bid the textbook that they requested, but they were helpful in determining which was the best package, because even though we received 6 bids, not all the bids included all the teaching materials and so forth. And so we try to work collaboratively with the constituents to make sure that what we're buying does indeed meet their needs. There are some things that are pretty cut and dry, where it's simply the lowest qualified bidder.
But not always.
Not always, no.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? Seeing none?
Okay.
Thank you for your
Back in
time.
September, thank you.
See you in September. All right. I'm going to quickly go to item number...
Did you want public comment on that, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, actually, that's a good idea, Mr. Heller. Thank you. We didn't vote on anything, but I'll ask for it. Is there any public comment on the purchasing policy? Dr. Tittle, do you have anything you would like to say? No, at this time? Anybody? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hiller. I'm going to take item number 2, and then I'm going to ask that we go out of order here, if we might, and move item number 3, which is the budget review, down, and items number 4 and items number 5 up, because I know we have some members of the town's pension board here, and I want to be cognizant of their time, if that's okay with the board. Okay. So item number 2, though, because I know we have some members of the Education Administration and the Board of Ed here. Item number 2 is to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Board of Education to fund a multi-year roof warranty program for school roofs, and to consider a special board appropriation for such programs. This was tabled from the original June 7th meeting. Here's where we stand with this. June 7th, we tabled the item for a couple of different reasons. Number one, we were waiting on a written report from the Town Facilities Commission. Number 2, we were also looking at a new selectman coming into office. We didn't understand what the new capital plan was going to look like. And since that time, quite frankly, we've had the revelations with the train station. So I had asked and worked with Dr. Tittle, as well as Mr. Tetra once he took office, for their recommendations on what to do with this project. And Mr. Tetra had honestly answered that with all that's been on his plate with the train station, that we haven't really had much time to focus on this. And Dr. Tittle had indicated that this is a priority for central office and the Board of Education, but that we had some time, and he wanted to make sure, as did I, that this was presented in the most appropriate light, meaning understanding what the capital program was going to look like and what the results of the train station were going to be. Fair? So it is good that we've had the Town Facilities Commission report. It's been before us. What I would like to do is ask if there's any questions, comments, or concerns so that we can relay that at this juncture to Dr. Tittle. And then I would ask, after doing that, that we postpone this to a date certain, a vote on this, until such time as we've got this additional information in deference to our colleagues, Mr. Tetra and Dr. Tittle. So does anybody have any comments on the Town Facilities report that they've reviewed? Mr. Brown?
My only comment is I have little doubt that the work needs to be done. And it's not just with the Board of Ed, but it's with the town, too. When I see these projects come before us, and I look at the cost to complete the project, I don't understand the costs. And in here it says repairs, but I don't know what repairs we're talking about. I don't know what square footage we're talking about. I know we're talking about 5 elementary schools. So I guess my concern is the $1 million to do the work. I can't match it up. It's not that the work doesn't need to be done. It's how do we get to $1 million? And I don't know if there's specs we can look at, if just more specifics we can look at. But it's about $175,000 a school for repairs, not for a new roof. Right. And it just seems out of whack to me. All right, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns based on the report? All right, I did have one. I looked at page 3, the last couple of paragraphs. This is a report that was in our package, and noted that the TFC noted a unanimous concern. And it kind of dovetails off what Mr. Brown just said, where they basically indicated that over the last 2 years, there's been about $55,000 worth of maintenance work done in these buildings relative to roof repairs. And there's also some information on leaks that have been seen in the cost earlier in the document. So we're looking at the total cost of the project is $905,000. What was interesting, I think it's 905, right? Yeah, 901. What's interesting is that 885,000 of it, 886,000 of it, really isn't for roof warranty, it's actual the repairs, right? And then an additional 15,000 or 16,000 is the actual roof warranties. So it's really for repair work. So we're basically saying that, and to Mr. Brown's point, we want to do $885,000 worth of roof repairs that are going to last only 5 to perhaps 10 years. And I need to get my arms around that, given that those same roofs only had $55,000 worth of maintenance in the last 2 years. That's a tough number to get my arms around as I look at this. It seems very disproportionate. God bless you. I also had a question on the extended warranties. Now, we've heard talk previously about extended warranties in this type of work and how it's difficult to hold the actual work itself. You can do the materials, but it's tough with the labor and all that because the roof contractors sometimes don't stay around too long. And I'm wondering, are these contractors, what do we know about these contractors? Are they solvent? Is there any issues with the contractors that we're talking about? Do we know anything like that? So those are the type of issues when it comes back before that I'd be interested to hear more about. And I just want to give you a fair warning, because they were good enough to produce the document, and I don't want to hit you with it later on, because I know we've delayed this a couple of months now. Is there any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I don't know what we get for the extended warranty, because in the third paragraph, the Town Facilities Commission, who's usually very, very complete, says the extended warranty would be offered by Johns Manville, which is, of course, the manufacturer of the roofing, not the company, right? Oh, excuse me, I'm above it. The warranty portion of the roofs for all leaks, labor, and materials during the 5-year warranty period. TFC noted that the warranty project will not provide full warranty coverage, and some sections and materials are excluded. So materials are John Manville. So that's simplistically, that's the shingle. So there's underlayment and all the other things that, frankly, every time we hear about a roof going bad, it's underlayment and flashing and all that other stuff. That's the stuff that fails. It's never the roofing. It's that kind of stuff. So do we even know if that would be covered under the warranty? And the other thing that seems disproportional is $15,000 to extend the warranty on $800,000. That just seems like a crazy good deal. So I don't understand that. Maybe, somehow I don't think it is, but, that also to me seemed very disproportional.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any other questions, comments, Ms. Claire?
Well, I guess my question is, some of these schools we've recently done work on, and then recently we've seen a letter that on the capital plan is Riverfield, and so I just wanted to know how these roof repairs fit in with the capital plan for the Board of Ed schools, and if that work's been done or not done, and how that works.
Thank you, Ms. LeClaire. Mr. Bolito, we're just laying out these questions so that they'll
Right.
come back when it's before us.
I think it would be helpful to have an actual copy of the warranty, because I keep thinking of McKinley, where the roof didn't fail, the underlayment failed, and it was the contractor not putting the underlayment on correctly that meant we didn't get covered under the warranty. So these sections and materials that are excluded, it would be helpful to know exactly what that means, because, 15 grand might be a great deal, or it may be a lousy deal, depending on what's actually covered. So having the actual warranty in hand to look at, I think, would be helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Polito. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I'm impressed with everybody's detailed knowledge here, but mine's a little broader question.
I'm sorry, could you pull down the mic, Bob, to make sure they get you?
Apologize.
Thanks.
Sorry. Thank you. I'll repeat what I said. I'm impressed with Mr. Bolito's and Mr. Flynn's and Mr. DeWitt's detailed knowledge of the subject matter. I have a broader question. This document talks about these roofs are kind of okay, need a little bit of help, but we got some other roofs that are really bad. So I was just wondering why we don't have like, a roof plan. That has like, here's all the roofs, here's all the, here's the cost, here's the long-term. And then like anything, you kind of, to address Mr. Brown's comments, some kind of second opinion to make sure that the cost is in sync with what we're doing. And maybe if you have a plan where you put the whole thing out to bid, maybe get some economies of scale, some savings. I mean, I have no idea, but it just seems like, to say, hey, we got five kind of good roofs, we want to repair a little bit, but then later we're going to get to the ones that need really substantial repairs. It seems to me they should be looked at as a package. And I don't know if that's.
I agree. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anybody else? All right, so I think that gives us a flavor of the type of topics that the board will be interested in when this does come back. And again, we appreciate your patience with this as we work our way through the other issues on a more macro perspective so that we can make this decision not in a vacuum, but with better information. With that, can I have a motion from a board member to table this to another date, please? Mr. DeWitt?
Make a motion to postpone this to a date certain September, is that?
Mr. Tetro, can I ask you on this, what's your view as?
I think if your board meeting, or meeting in September would be,
Yeah, please come up to the mic. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. for
Mr.
doing
Chair, I
this.
believe your meeting in September would be like September 5th or 6th.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, right after Labor Day, right after a rather late session on that, and before the capital planning workshop, which is roughly September 15th. You might want to consider the first meeting in October, which might be the 5th or 6th of October as a date certain to, if that meets the Board of Ed's timing.
That's what I wanted to ask.
that's-
Dr. Toto, that's fine.
October works?
Okay, so can
So,
we, thank you.
I'll amend
both
my
of you.
motion to postpone this item to date certain October 4th regular meeting.
Do we have a second to that? We got Mr. Brockfeld on the second. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. That motion passes. Do we have any comments? I'm going to ask if there's any comments from the public on that item. Anything? Any Board of Ed members or anything? Mr. Carey?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. How are we doing tonight? I'm going to let the administration answer all the questions just asked, but we've asked them and heard most of those answers, and I got to see the questions asked and answered at TFC again. So the general thrust that was presented to our subcommittee and then the board on this was one of spacing out the capital expenditures for these roofs. You make a very good point that the large sum is the repair part. That's what the manufacturers are requiring so they can have that small fee for the extended warranty. But the challenge is that we had a great many roofs that were done in 1991. And these elementary school roofs are averaging about $1 million each right now in terms of the bids that are coming to us. And they're all conflating at the same time. So by being able to kick these down the road 5 to 10 years, we can start to schedule out the others one at a time without having to have 2 or 3 failures in the same year and have it come to you and say, oh, we need $5 million for roofs in any one given year based on the current environment. So I think a large part of the rationale that moved us forward to the Board of Ed, without speaking for the Board of Ed, was that this was a way to spread that financial pain, because for whatever reason, in 1991, we did a whole bunch of them, 8 or more at the same time. So that's the rationale that got through our board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carey, appreciate that. With that, we'll move on to the next topic, which I'm going to move, as I indicated, item number 4, we're going to take before item number 3. So we're going to review the current status of the town's pension funds. I think, Mr. Hiller, do you want to? And I think Mr. Fahey's going to join us. Thank you so much for coming tonight, appreciate it.
As I indicated, Mr. Chairman, to you earlier, unfortunately, Mr. Malarkey, who chairs the Joint Investment Committee of the 2 pension boards, is traveling this evening, coming back from the Midwest on business, and is unable to be here. But Brian Vahey, who's a member of the board and very knowledgeable, and you probably know his better half better than you know him, but Mr. Vahey is kind enough to be with us this evening.
Paul, can I interrupt you? Just, are there any handouts regarding this? Because we don't have anything over here.
There was within the agenda, there was a 3-page summary of the, actually, the March 31st status of the pension fund.
I have it, sorry.
Okay. I think one of the key elements, and this board was notified back in late May, that you'll notice that this report was generated by Evaluation Associates, who had been our advisor on the fund since spring of 2009, has been taken over by both Mercer and Callan, and the board adopted at their June 14th meeting, I believe it was, to transfer the contract that we had with Evaluation Associates to Callan Associates. And though the representatives from Callan were at the meeting, we have not had a formal meeting with Callan. There is a meeting scheduled for August 18th with Callan, which will be the first time we've had an opportunity to meet with our new advisors. And so that's a key role. They are in the process. I've been in at least weekly and sometimes virtually daily contact with the 2 representatives from Callan on where they are and what they're doing. And I look forward to the meeting on August 18th. One thing that I can say, and I would also say, if we exclude the current week, which hasn't been great, as you're probably aware, in the equity markets particularly, the preliminary, and I will give this as very, very preliminary numbers, as to the asset value of the fund is roughly $294 million. To give you a baseline on that, that compares to about $252.5 million in the past year. That is after, those numbers are after we paid out $16.3 million in beneficiary payments in both plans during the course of the past fiscal year. Net, our returns are in excess of 20% over that period of time, which should help when we get numbers early this coming winter from our actuaries as far as what the projected contributions should be for both plans. Other than that, I think Mr. Vahey and I are open to questions as to where we are, the asset mix.
What was the time frame on the 20%, I'm sorry?
The last fiscal year. And that reflects the going from 252 to currently 293, but in addition to that, as I say, we've paid out. We've made an additional 12 months of payments, and our payment stream for the past year was approximately $16.3 million in beneficiary payments. And obviously that, you know, from a long-term standpoint, that beneficiary payment stream continues to escalate. The town employees plan, as of July 1st, did receive a COLA increase of 2.7% in their beneficiary payments. The police and fire plan is on a biannual payment, and this is the off year for increases, but that 2.7% would be built into whatever they might get next July.
Thank you. Mr. Bolito, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. The category that's noted as total alternatives, that's hedge funds and the like. What's the mix in terms of the type of investment for alternatives?
The mix right now, if you look there, at the middle of that page, there's a group called Canadas, which was a investment that the boards decided to make. The asset allocation that was adopted by the boards in June of 2010 called for a 23%, roughly 23% commitment to alternatives. 10% hedge funds, 5% real estate, 5% private equity, and 3% commodities. The board has been dealing, well, initially we were dealing with what we felt was, we now feel is essentially close to a $300 million fund. And so, you know, if we're doing 10% there, we should have 30 million in hedge funds. I will add that in the fourth quarter of our fiscal year, an additional commitment was made to Wellington of $10 million. It was taken out of the equity side. Wellington is maybe Brian could explain it better than.
Wellington is an interesting, it's actually a fund of funds, so it is a hedge fund, but it's underneath the Wellington Fund Company name, which you folks, I think people are pretty familiar with. They're a Boston group. The reason we selected them is we were looking for equity exposure, but we didn't necessarily want just a long-only shop. We wanted folks who would kind of minimize the downside and hopefully pick up some of the upside.
Are they reflected on this sheet? Because I might be missing it.
No, it is not reflected
Okay.
on this sheet because that investment was made effective May 1st.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Okay.
So anyway, we selected them. There was some discussion around fund of funds and the additional expense there, but we liked Wellington because actually there is no additional expense because all the funds are underneath their umbrella. They're their own managers that manage many funds or have managed many of the funds that folks have their money in, like the Vanguard Group and other families, and so they keep that all under one roof, so the fees are relatively low for a hedge fund in general, and also long-term steady performance. So that's why we selected them.
Okay, makes sense.
Just as a quick follow-up on that, on the top of the third page, you'll see in excess of $10 million in cash, which was really the funds that we had liquidated funds out of three equity managers, and those funds were subsequently transferred into Wellington on May 1st.
Now, I'm sorry, you had mentioned that you were looking at having somewhere in the vicinity of 23% in alternative investments, and yet, according to this sheet, the total percentage of the portfolio for alternatives is 4.2. Am I just reading that wrong, or?
No, because we had to go through a transition period, so we just couldn't instantaneously put all the money to work. And plus, private equity and the real estate fund are both, you make your commitment, but then they draw down those funds. So as we get a capital call, we put it in there, and then we've been pulling out of we're almost out of I think we are out of Pequot now, aren't we?
That was one of my
Pequot,
questions.
Yeah,
They were
I mean, it's just
closing up shop.
runoffs of like mortgage
Yeah.
securities.
Pequot has roughly half of those funds have been returned during the fourth quarter. TA Realty, which you see at the bottom, has, as of this month, as of July 18th, took down another $350,000, which means that they have drawn $4.6 million towards a $5 million commitment. Lexington Partners, which is a private equity fund, has drawn in the fourth quarter an additional $750,000. towards, again, a commitment of $5 million, and that will continue. But those commitments have been made, and as Brian said, they'll draw it down.
We also haven't finished selecting another equity fund, and our commodities have not. We've had some presentations, but we haven't made the commitments there, so.
Board actually voted voted and tabled because of the transition of managers. We had presentations from 3 commodity funds. They had made a decision, wanted to wait and have Callan review the decisions that were made for a $9 million commitment to the commodity mandate.
Okay. Last question I have, and can't bring up the pension fund without talking about Madoff, and I don't want to bounce us into private executive session, so if that's where we're headed, I'll hold the question, but where are we in terms of the Madoff litigation, in terms of our hope of recovering some of that money?
I think Attorney Saxel is here this evening, and I think if we were to discuss that, we would have to go to a private
Okay,
executive
I can hold that
session.
till later, that's fine. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Mr. Brockfeld, and then I'll hit Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. Paul, Brian, thanks. And thanks for coming, Brian, because I know it's not your, necessarily your role. I have two questions, actually. One piggybacks a little bit on what Mr. Bolito started talking about, which is the whole alternatives policy. And, what concerns me, or actually, I'll throw it out there so your answer, is that the board is made up, I think there's 15 people on the board, if I remember correctly.
15
The
voting
combined
members,
board,
yes.
right. And there's a lot of positions that are reserved for various town representatives and so forth, that those people don't necessarily have a lot of financial experience. It's not expected of them. That's not their job. And there are a handful of people like Brian who are very experienced, although we did lose somebody just recently. I noticed somebody resigned from the board.
Ralph Money?
Ralph Money.
Right. So what I'm concerned about, and I think to some extent our experience bears it out, is the combination of the limited number of people on the board who are really versant in the area, plus the fact that through bad luck or whatever the reason, we've cycled through something like, I was trying to count the number, like 7 advisors in an incredibly short period of time. I don't know the exact number, but it's
5 in 6 years.
5 advisors in 6 years. I don't really see how it's possible to be in these extremely complicated and relatively risky or hard to understand investment vehicles with both a limited number of people on the board who have real experience or understanding of the product and what unfortunately has been a constant cycling of advisors who you're depending on, obviously, heavily to help you pick and manage these guys. So I guess that's my first question to either of you guys is how do you feel comfortable putting 23%, which is about $70 million, I think, if my math is right, of the town's money into those products?
I can take it. That's a fair question. It's a good question. First of all, I also like to make sure that we have the tendency to just always use the term hedge fund when we talk about alternatives, but the reality is all alternatives also include real estate, including commercial real estate, and obviously private equity, which is its own beast. So they're alternative in the fact, and there are some hedge funds in there, but our commodity mandate could very well just have been done through an ETF. We could have done our commercial real estate through a REIT. They're just not mainstream investments. I would say that the value of the advisors is an ongoing one. That, at least with Evaluation Associates, they were there at every meeting to sort of tell us how the funds are performing, which I think is a critical thing, and we also get the regular report outs. But as far as selecting managers, you would hope not to have a lot of turnover in that. I mean, we're not micromanaging these. We're making good initial selections and then watching the investments hopefully grow. And I find that there are more than just, 1 or 2 quality investment choices. And the role of the advisor is really to try and winnow that field down for us to then make a decision. So I kind of look at it as a two-phase thing. The advisor there gets the people in front of us, and then it's up to us to actually educate folks on the board because we're fiduciaries. And quite honestly, whether or not we have to educate ourselves on a selection of a mutual fund or an equity manager, I think that's just as, maybe in some cases even more complicated or hard to do than to look at some of these funds, look at their performance. And we've we had a long discussion on the selection of alternative assets and sort of what sort of percentage should go there and why we should allocate to them. And I liked the thought process that came out of it. We're only comfortable investing in alternative assets where there's extreme high level of clarity and openness with the fund manager. So in other words, we're not, which I don't think, unfortunately, we had, obviously, with Madoff. It'd be zero in there. And a lot of fund-to-funds sometimes will just tell you the mix of many different investments you're in, so we sort of stayed away from that. We're only interested in ones that would give us, clear and frequent information on what the investments are, and also had a level of liquidity that we were satisfied with, that if we didn't like what we saw or we heard, we would take our money out. So those sort of our guidelines for how we would get into the space. And then from there, it's we aren't shooting for home runs in that space. Actually, most of the discussion around alternative investments is, one, we have the ability to be long-term investors because of the nature of the paying out a pension over a long period of time. And two, that's probably one of the few investments besides having a nice broad mix, give yourself diversification, where the manager is actually focused on limiting the downside, which we feel is probably our primary responsibility as fiduciaries. So I don't know if that's a good enough answer. And I also would say we've taken pains in the past few months to actually educate the board. Matter of fact, we just put a piece out on the role of trustees in managing pension boards to sort of bring her up to speed. And I know we're going back and reviewing all the managers that have been selected because we have a decent amount of turnover on the board, so everybody should get a fresh new look at the managers that we have selected across all the asset classes. And education's good, so.
If I could follow up on that, Bob, or Ken, rather. I think the other thing that, and I concur 100% with what Brian has said, but I think one of the other things that the board is looking at and will be looking at over the next 6 months, there's 2 points here. First off is, and you've had this discussion, this board has had this discussion, the investment return that we anticipate on this. We are using from our actuaries an 8% investment return. That is going to be under some degree of scrutiny in the coming months. The 8%, the asset mix that Evaluation Associates developed was developed, and they're able to go back and say, this is what we anticipate you're going to get in a perfect world on that asset mix. It was fractionally under 8%. And as you move out on the curve, let's say, or when you start to make higher risk investments, obviously, you would anticipate that the return will be, more volatile. And, but in that effort to come as close to the 8% as possible, one of the things that we did, for example, when we selected Conatus, they came in and made a presentation. There was a subcommittee of some of the people who were, say, more knowledgeable, as someone pointed out before, in the whole investment arena, who went down. One of the, as we're all aware, Fairfield County is loaded with hedge funds. Conatus's offices are on the 4th floor of the office building right by Greenwich Railroad Station. We were there. We met with the general partner, several of his people. Some of the staff lives in Fairfield. And I think, we went there to use the cliche, to kick the tires a little bit and get just an internal feel, spent perhaps an hour and a half in their offices with half a dozen members of the board to attempt to accomplish it.
I would actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because and I don't want to get into a debating society. It's not the position here now, because you guys have a responsibility, but I would just throw this out to you. We had, basically, as far as I can tell, when I was on the pension, we had 2 experiences with alternatives. One was the M word, unfortunately, but the other was Pequot. Now, the end result of Pequot was a profitable experience. However, Pequot closed down I guess it was about a year ago or so, I can't remember anymore.
2 years, May of 2009.
In the middle of an insider trading scandal, and had to close shop. If they had been forced to close a year before that, just by random luck, which is all it was, we could have lost a fortune of our money because the value of the mortgage securities and all the stuff they held was dramatically lower at that point, probably 50 cents on the dollar. And we had like a lot of money in there, too much at the time. And my only point to you is that the investment landscape is littered with people who thought they could go into an investment shop and kick the tires because the guys look like nice guys or they had fancy Bloomberg machines and so forth. I'm not demeaning anybody's experience here. My actual point, and I think it's an important point, and you guys can do what you think is best, that's your job, but my important point goes back to what Brian said was a fair question, which is not that the people on the board are incapable of making good decisions or that you're not asking the right questions. It's that, in my opinion, I don't think you have the ability, I don't think anybody can ask the right questions or really get inside these organizations, number one. But number two, there's so much turnover on the board itself, and there's so few people on the board who have the kind of experience that Brian has. And hopefully, we're not going to be changing advisors on an annual basis, but we have, as you said, 5 advisors in 6 years. So to me, it's one thing to be in the Vanguard S&P 500 index fund or some sort of basic fixed income fund, which we are and we should be. But to be in these kind of investments that need this kind of monitoring, I think is questionable. But that's one point I wanted to make. The other point I wanted to ask Brian was, and I would ask Bob Malarkey if he was here, but he's not, so I apologize, Brian, but the 8% return is, I think, the single most important issue facing the entire town financial future. I don't think anybody could argue with that if you actually took out a calculator. And personally, I don't see how 8% is achievable over the long term. I know we've had a very good year, and we're all happy about that. But, and if you just look at the report you guys handed out, we've returned since December of '99, which is now approximately 12 years. 12 years, we've averaged 4% a year over the last 12 years. I know that includes some extraordinary experiences. But this is an appropriate question to ask you guys. How confident are you that you can deliver 8% return year in, year out, on average, so that the town is not left with these enormous contributions that we're being forced to make currently? And if not, do you have a guesstimate as what an appropriate return assumption is? Unfair question, but you're here, so.
Yes, I would just like to say that is a totally unfair question. Put that on the record. And if I knew that answer, I would be a very wealthy man and probably not living here. I'd probably be somewhere in Greenwich.
Beverly Hills.
So there, I noted your concern about us being able to pick appropriate hedge funds, and I would say the makeup of the board actually, beyond my experience in working with alternative assets and actually working at a hedge fund, I would say that Eric Calipers, who is a fireman here in town, is very knowledgeable. I would say Mr. Malarkey has shown to be adept at knowing the topic matter. We have Jeff Mullen, which I don't know if you've met him. He's also well-versed, and Fred Schaefer is also knows his way around. So I've named, at least a handful of people there that we're usually the ones that do the on-site due diligence. So, we studied the issue, and we know what our fiduciary duty is, and we're going to do our best to do that. Now, as far as the return long-term, I really don't like looking back to the '99 time period because not only did you have the exceptional period that we just, so fresh in our memories, but we had 2 declines in that period. So, and the fund used to be heavily weighted, I think more so in the equity space. So, and it had the Madoff, the M word there. So, we're looking at the reason we're working with the actuaries, and I've pushed so hard is because I want to see what our liabilities look like. Because you're really trying to match your returns to what the profile, or if you want to have I call it the inverse return of what your obligations are over time, and that's what we're really trying to hit, trying to get our hands around that. And I actually push, if it was up, I'm just one member of the board, and I just kind of look at, I used to manage money for pensions, GEs, and they took sort of the same approach that we're using here, but I'd always been a proponent, even there, of looking at something we called liability-driven investments. So really try to match your investments to sort of what you've got to pay out. And I don't know if we'll evolve that way or what we'll do or what the return recommendations will be made that we're going to go with, but I can tell you there'll be a lot of good discussions and thought put into whatever number does come out, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the next year, so.
Paul, who makes the decision on that? In other words, if the town were to say hypothetically, we think 8's too high, it should be 7 or whatever. Who-
Ken, can I dovetail on your question
Sure,
as well?
go ahead.
On that, because it's, let's see if I can make it more fair.
Go ahead.
How's that?
Take exception.
I think that's easy.
Brian, one of the things that we had discussed during our, and I didn't mean it, and I apologize if I got you off. One of the things that we had discussed during our review of the pensions and what we needed to fund in the next budget cycle was we had a long discussion led quite well by Mr. Brockfeld regarding the 8% return, and also you were here that evening. And we discussed really taking a holistic view of all the assumptions related to that actuarial report.
Right.
And we had discussed our desire and our request, quote unquote, to the pension board of actually doing that type of review. And I think you were here and said, yeah, actually, it was kind of overdue because it had been quite some time since they had done it last time, right?
It's a 5-year cycle, and I think we're right on that, so it was perfect.
Right. So where does, what I'm interested in, I think I'll get to your point,
No, you're
Ken,
going right where I was going.
is where are we in that study? Are you guys moving forward with that? 'Cause
We,
Board has not voted. We have a proposal from Hooker and Holcomb, who are our current actuaries. I have been in dialogue with another firm, another major firm, to get a proposal. We will hopefully have that back for the August meeting and be able to make some determination. There's really two studies. There's a experience study, which was done last in early 2007, which looks at all factors.
Right.
The investment return, the mortality rate, the inflation rate, what has happened with salaries within the town that drive our liability. And so there's several components that have to be looked at. And also the longevity of people staying here, how long they stay, which is a factor. The second thing is Brian has touched on, is the asset liability study. And I think even Callan, on their first time in the door, talked about that very strongly, that we've really got to handle it. That was last done, I believe, in 1998, roughly.
So what is the process and the timeframe now for you to make a decision?
I would think that the board, if we don't act at the August meeting, there'll probably be a meeting in September, and we would act to get some numbers prior to the budgetary cycle.
So when could we expect to see that report? Because I think that goes right to Mr. Brockfeld's point, right?
I would think
as well
late
as-
fall, early winter.
And Paul, as long as we're at the table, and I appreciate this is fabulous, included in that, and you, of course, were here when I had these discussions with the former first selectman, but one obviously is to revisit all the other assumptions such as mortality
Yep.
and longevity.
Yeah, that would be
Also-
in the,
But also, what I'm concerned about is to see if we weren't to hit 8%. And if we were higher, too, that's fine, but if we got
Sensitivity
5, if we got
analysis.
6,
Sensitivity
sensitivity analysis, I don't see how, and I don't want to relitigate it, but how we can do our job here, making long-term plans for the town, without at least knowing what may be coming down the road. Not will come down the road, because nobody has a crystal ball, like Brian said, or else he'd be living in Greenwich. But we need to know if, in fact, we end up at 6% or 9%, if we're lucky, how that would affect the long-term.
well, I think, and from a budgetary standpoint, you're going to, because it is going to have relatively major budgetary impact, both on the town and the Board of Education.
So are you guys going to be asking Hooker and Holcomb to give you a report that shows a sensitivity analysis on any of the variables, not just the one I'm focusing on?
right, well, that was actually the impetus for looking at perhaps other actuarial vendors, because we'd sort of seen some output from Hooker, and we, if you go out and do some Google searching on actuarial firms and just look at some of the studies that are being done on a national level, that's what they're essentially doing a lot. They're coming up with, there's different there's different ways of looking at liabilities, and, we're talking about defined benefit right now, but you can see firms that have looked at defined contribution, defined benefit. Once they have a grasp of what our liability is, you can look at different ways to solve it. You can do it with annuities, you can do a DBDC, you can do LDI that I spoke about, liability. So, we're kind of looking for a firm that is kind of pushing that on us, and we're looking at bids right now from Hooker and some other ones, but that was sort of the
More
urge.
information, the better, right?
Yeah, and then we can make, because I think, yes, you guys completely need to know if, we have our report out and we say, it's been 6%, it was 6% last year, you have to know what that means in dollars for your planning purposes. So that's what we're trying to drive to, because I think it also is going to, that liability study is going to drive sort of what you think you're going to need for cash needs and long-term investment sort of stuff, so. The only other thing I'd like to point out that we accomplished in the past, I guess it's the past year, was we finalized, as Paul said, a new set of investment guidelines, if you will, to sort of say what the allocations are, not necessarily what the different names are going to be, but just what buckets they're going to be. And that was done in conjunction with Evaluation Associates, and they did some modeling around, and we talked about they got the returns, but I think that was a big step, and actually the guidelines were written up. I don't know that they were necessarily like that before, but now we've got that nailed down. I think it was a big accomplishment.
Brian, before I do want to recognize Mr. Mayor. Bob, do you mind if I ask him one question based on what he just said? I did notice, now it's in fixed income, so fine, but I did notice you've got two funds that have over 15%, at least as of this date, that have over 15% of the value in those two funds. What is the guideline for any one investment, even if it is a fixed income vehicle?
Both of those funds are fixed income funds,
Right.
core fixed income essentially in both cases, with the exception of Sykes, which does have a mandate to take 20% of their investment into higher yield fixed income funds.
Yeah, I just want to know, I'm just asking what the
And,
threshold is.
the target on fixed income, was it the 15?
No, I think it was.
And I think, well, the...
And not
the-
in total, Paul. Yeah. Not in
And,
total, Paul. I'm talking per investment, though, actually, because,
Oh, per,
yeah, because if you look at it, right, you've got two investments here that are both
per
over-
manager, what you're talking about, Tom.
I'm sorry? Per manager, whatever.
Yeah.
So you just have, you have a huge,
Our target, and I'm going from memory here, and I can forward to you the asset allocation that was adopted by the board, June, which is now 13 months old, was in the 25 to 30% range. So we were overweight as far as fixed income right now.
that's not what I'm asking.
He wants to know that, also in that guideline, it does stipulate the maximum amount in any one investment, but even though
Yeah.
we went over that over and over again, all the different things, it went through some iterations, I don't have that on hand, so I can't answer that. We'll get back to you. But it's in there.
Because I know at any given point in time, depending on what's happening in the rest of the portfolio, it might dip above that percentage, but I also know that was a hot bucket when, he who shall not be named, that all
Yeah.
went down.
Yep.
That was a hot bucket, so I want to just make sure that, you're sticking within your own guidelines over the period of time. So can you please just get back to us on
Yeah, I shall.
with that investment policy? And Brian, thank you for bringing up the investment policy. I think I need to go over to Mr. Mara, who's been waiting patiently, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My main question both of my main questions have been brought up. One is 8%. Before I ask that question, why do you use December 88 as inception? Or 99, I'm sorry.
Frankly, one of the issues that we've had, and it relates back to, in part to 5 managers in 6 years, is getting the right data from all of the various advisors that we've had, and in converting all that over. Some of these managers have been there prior to '99. Some of them are newer, and so the dates are not always, it depends on what data they were able to accumulate, what evaluation was able to accumulate from the previous manager, and this rapid transition had caused some problems as far as those
But you
numbers.
know how much money you put in every year, and you know how
Yes,
much money you paid
but
out every
you
year.
see, they're the ones who are tracking
Know how
that.
much
We
money you
don't,
have left, and you can multiply and divide.
I'm sorry?
I mean, it's a number that can be calculated.
It
You-
it can be
you-
calculated, but the problem has been coordination between the advisors, the individual managers, and the custodian, as far as that's concerned.
No, I understand what you said, but here's what I'm saying. At one point in time, you know what the balance was.
With
In
with an
any given
individual.
year, you have actuarial reports, you have your balance.
Yes. And
And-
audit
And you
reports.
have your annual distributions, and you have your annual contributions. And with those three variables, you could calculate a return
Sure could.
from any point in time.
Correct.
So it just seems that would be a valuable thing to do.
Tedious calculation.
The 8% is a really important number, and I question whether it's reasonable to anticipate 8%. And I think that whatever that number is needs to be nailed down, but I also question, I'm sorry, the chair has left, the need to do sensitivity testing. You know, I mean, what good, if you know that, or if you believe that 8% is a good number, or 7% or 9%, then that's the number you should go with. What good does it do you to know that, well, if it were 6%, we'd have to put in an extra $1.5 million? Or if it was 9%, we'd have to put in $1.5 million left dollars. Other than it might corrupt your thinking by saying, oh, we put in less if it's 9%. I mean, what's the value? I'm a little lost as to what's the value of sensitivity testing, because the number theoretically is what it should calculate to be based upon your experience factors and your market belief factors.
Certainly, I don't know if you're very familiar with the accounting standards for
Yeah.
pension accounting, PGAAP. PGAAP may very well be changing to something that we actually do in the private space right now. And if that becomes the case, you're going to have a lot more volatility in your numbers. You're not going to get to smooth your numbers. So volatility, in my mind, to something like a town where you can't take huge funding volatility, your mill rates can be bouncing all over the place. So I would think you'd care very much to know how sensitive your funding assumptions are going to be based on what your returns actually come into, because you may be living that in
Well,
the
you
near
need to
future.
know what your returns are versus your assumptions. But what's the value of calculating something that's a number that you don't think
We
is a
call it
realistic
actual
number?
funding versus projected funding. That's why you do projections over time. You're dealing with a long-term liability and a short-term asset that currently.
And
at this
I'm
point
aware of
in time.
that.
So
In other words, today, let's say today you were before us.
right now,
Let me ask, finish the question. Let's
It's all
say today you were before us with, and this was the decision-making body, whether it should be 6% or 8%. I don't think one of the decision-making criteria would be what the calculation of the contribution requirement would be if it were 6% or 8%.
it's the impact on the town, sir.
Yeah, I totally know that it
That's-
impacts the
that's
budget.
that's what we care about.
But it wouldn't be a decision of what you'd put in your assumptions. You wouldn't base your assumptions on what your contribution is going to be.
I'm not suggesting that.
Can I take a crack at that, Bob? Thank you. Okay, is this okay, Tom? But the only reason, because we've gone through this a lot, at least in my mind, and I think I'm thinking the way Brian is, our board here doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? We're asked to approve bonding requirements for schools and other facilities that go out for 20 years, right? And could have impacts on our AAA bond rating and our townspeople's ability to pay and tax rates that you've talked about extensively. So at least in my mind, I like to know what the potential picture is going forward with these pension contributions at different rates of return, so that I can take that into account when I'm voting on these large, potentially voting on large future projects.
Yeah, no, I understand
I
what
know
you're
you're saying
saying,
the number,
but
right.
you're not, are you going to make a decision on your contribution level based upon the percentage? Or are you going to base the percentage upon good, rational, reasonable thinking? I mean, I think it's totally inappropriate to say that you may use that percentage to help you decide what the percentage, to use the dollar amount that would be required to be contributed to help you determine what the correct percentage is.
No, there's no correct percentage. It's at best an educated guess.
Right,
Right.
but
And
the
that's-
best
and that-
educated
and
guess
that-
percentage, let me say.
Right, and that, I think that goes to the heart of the problem, is that everybody, we believe, is working in good faith. Although I think that you could argue that over time, towns have used aggressive percentages in order to make their future budgets look better, right?
Correct. And corporations.
And corporations, although corporations have been required, and Brian should correct this, have been required to change that dramatically. I think they have to use corporate bond rates.
They have to use a triple B plus a set spread,
Right,
and
yeah,
have
it's-
for
it's
several
been-
years.
yes,
For what it's worth, corporations and governments have
Can't
completely
game it.
diverged on this, right? Brian, correct me if I say anything
Correct, and
wrong.
that's why,
Right.
and there's been a lot of discussion around moving us towards some sort of a spread that moves as well on us, which would be tough.
But at the end of the day, I guess I would just say that more information is better than less information. And to know that the town might be facing certain expenditures in the future, if different outcomes come up, can only be helpful. I mean, I see your point. You're right. The investment return will just be the investment return at the end of the day.
Well, I'm not just saying that, but I'm saying, when the town makes a decision on how much it should contribute.
Actually, we don't make that decision. The actuary tells
Well,
us.
I know, when the, well, no, we make that decision.
We have the final authority to
We have
make
the
that
final
decision.
authority.
but we choose to
We
follow
make that
the-
decision,
right.
okay. And we can underfund that, we can overfund that, whatever. I'm just saying is, as you pointed out, it used to be both in corporate, and it's much less in corporate today, but it's definitely in towns. You ratchet up that number as much as you can to reduce today's contribution requirement to have a lower tax rate to get reelected. Okay. Okay. And what I'm saying is, and if you want to kind of get a sense, okay, if it's 6% instead of 8%, we'd have to put in $2 million more dollars. Maybe that's good information to know. Maybe if your mind says to yourself, ooh, I think it's going to be closer to 6%, therefore I'm going to not bond so much, or I'm going to not spend so much money, or I'm going to build up my reserves because I'm worried about the future. I can see that aspect of it.
That's exactly it.
Okay, but it's not to be used to help make a decision on what the contribution level determined should not be used to make a decision on what that percentage should be.
It's a data point, right? To put it into a broader context.
Yeah. The other comment, just very briefly, since the M word has been mentioned last time, a lot of the M word profit that was lost was paper profit, and I don't think that if you adjust these numbers for that, it's going to have it would have a dramatic impact on your total return over the last 10 years or over inception.
I beg to differ, it was a big loss.
It's a loss is a loss.
Yeah, I'm talking about a magnitude.
True.
I mean, the actual dollars that were lost versus the paper dollars that were lost is a significant difference.
One thing to follow up a little bit about the recent dialogue, Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB, has just within the past month issued their final draft on a new standard. They issued an exposure draft last June. They've now issued the final draft, which will be reviewed this fall and will probably go into effect for fiscal 14. It shouldn't have, given our current funding status, very much impact as far as we're concerned. But it is going to have dramatic impact on funds that are underfunded for municipalities and states, particularly our own state, which is significantly underfunded.
Paul,
as
do
far
you-
as
can you-
this is concerned.
you
And it's going to be watched very, very closely by the rating agencies, obviously. And I think, when we have discussions with our actuaries and/or our auditors, I think this board is going to have to be aware of what's out there.
Paul, with that in mind, can you distribute an electronic copy of that to the board members, please?
I'll see if I can get an electronic copy, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I just one small thing. I misspoke earlier when I said that I'd be a really wealthy man and live in Greenwich. Actually, I probably own one of the nice places down there in Southport, so. I have no issue. I have no issue with, yeah, I have no issue with fair.
Too late, it's already on record. It'll be in the pats tomorrow, don't worry.
You can go home tonight.
All right.
May I?
Please, Mr. Kiley.
Without dragging this on, I wanted to go back to the previous conversation, which I found extremely informative. And I think if I understood one of Mr. Mayor's points, it was the same question we were asking a few years back and even last year, even back when you were on the board before, is where does the 8% come from? Wasn't that part of it? Because
It's a historical
mean-
study.
Yeah, I mean,
But-
I remember when I was on the pension board, I remember trying to, I
Under-
think it was 9% at that point or something.
Eight.
It was-
I-
8.5,
So as
Yeah,
Mr.
I mean,
Brack,
you
yes,
know,
Mr.
I
Brack-
tried to help move it down.
which we did.
Which we did, and there are pressures to move it up, and.
Right, and
then
that's-
what I'm saying is, what the contribution number is should not impact what that number is
Right, it should be the
determined
other
to
way
be.
around.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying. But
Yes.
can I just have a quick reminder of the process to get to the 8%? I think the analysis that Brian just quickly mentioned.
Certainly, the way, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. The way the actuarials traditionally do it, and actually not even just them, also investment managers will have a tendency to, they have data that goes actually back to early 1900s. And they can show you returns on the equity markets, believe it or not, from that entire period. And you'll see people that try and do that. And then they take their mix of your assumed investments, and they'll try and tie a return to each one of those. And they'll take both the return and the volatility of those returns, and they'll run a Monte Carlo simulation with all those in there and say, the majority of the time on that curve of your returns, 8%. But then, as Mr. Brackfeld's pointed out, I was like, well, look, if you look at the past 10 years, so you'll get folks to do there's another analysis, you could do rolling 10-year periods, you can do rolling 15-year periods, you can do it to match the duration of your liability. There's a lot of different ways you can slice it, and quite frankly, with statistics and numbers, there's probably a way to, if you want to try and get a number, I'm sure there's a way to work your way towards that number. So it's a matter of asking hard questions and coming up with something that everybody agrees with. So.
Which kind of gets to my question, which is, what would be the most logical time period to look over? Is it 4 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? Because they're all going to be different, because they're all going to include, ups and downs in the markets.
So that's why, I'm sorry I cut you off again, but that's why we went to the liability analysis, because, and also you're speaking about what the number should be and what the impact's going to be, not just the returns, but you guys also have to know when you come budget negotiations and you're approving cost of living / also, salary raises, you need to see, that's going to grow your liability, because those people are hopefully going to be working here for a long time. So that's part of the sensitivity analysis to know, well, if we grow our employee base by X% per year, that's going to have this sort of effect on what we have to fund as well, if we use 8% or 6% or 5%. But I would also say that stream of payments that we're going to owe over time should shape the time period that you're sort of looking at. So, the duration of how long you're going to make payments out. You should look at your asset base and sort of say, that's sort of my window. So I would say it's a shorter window. It's not one of these 70-year look-backs. You can, you're going to want to look to see what variance in returns did I get, say, over, I'm guessing, our liability duration. I don't know how old. Well, I'll just assume somewhere in the 30 to 40-year range will be what it'll look like. And so corporate bonds, the longest you're going to get like a 30-year. But if you kind of look at that duration, so you're talking about like a 40-year window.
Okay.
And you're going to move it around, different periods of 40 years.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Brian, before I turn it over to Mr. Brown, who's been waiting patiently, what you just said, though, I think is critical, because it's something that this board advocated for quite some time ago, which was the study to look at the growth and the liabilities and what impact those items have on the contracts. And that was very specifically what this board recommended be done prior to contract negotiations so that those factors could be factored into what those agreements worth. I likened it to signing a mortgage without having the information as to how much it would cost you to approve that contract. So I completely agree with you on that. So with that, I'm going to go right to Mr. Brown.
Okay, I now have two questions. Just going back to the 8%. This is two easy ones. If we were going to change the 8%, who makes that decision?
Last time, that decision was made by the pension board, but it's really, in effect, it's a budgetary decision. The pension board, and I think Mr. Mayor was on the board back 8 years ago, or roughly like in that time, for 8 or 9 years ago, when that decision was made to lower from 8.5 to 8%. But in fact, I think, in reality, all that's going to do is drive a number that the actuaries are going to give you. And as you lower that, obviously, the contribution level is going to go up, which then becomes a budgetary decision, which this board, Board of Selectmen, and the RTM are going to have to struggle with as to, in the total context of the budget.
I understand that. So, but if the percentage, if it was going to change, it would change through the pension board.
That's historically, and the only time that I'm familiar with it, it was the point in the early part, 2002, 2003, or something like that, when it was changed. It was a pension board vote. There is nothing within the charter or town ordinances which dictate who does it.
Okay. The second question is just, I thought, Brian, I heard you say you have written guidelines? The pension board has written guidelines?
Investment guidelines, yes.
I'm sorry, what guidelines?
Investment guidelines.
Investment guidelines.
Policy.
Do we
Policy.
have a copy of that?
Yes.
Oh, the finance board does? Can I get a copy?
Well, I'll forward an electronic copy.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Bolito?
Just a request, because I know we have other items on the agenda tonight. I wanted to make a request that for our next scheduled meeting, which is August 2nd, if we could meet in private executive session with Attorney Saxel to discuss Madoff.
Okay, Mr. Hiller, can you take a note of that? And Mr. Saxel, can you? I hear it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Well, I want it on the agenda, that's what I noticed, I'm asking Mr. Hiller to take a note. Thank you. Mr. Kiley?
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. One additional request. I know that this report is from the first quarter. I'm guessing that the June report should be ready relatively soon, or maybe it is ready?
I would anticipate, it really is, there's about a 6 to 7 week lag on it.
Right, well,
I would think
almost-
that, we certainly have it at the August 18th
Can
pension
we
board
just
meeting and
get
distribute
it
it
an
to you
electronic
folks.
copy when it's ready?
Don't we post it,
Would-
too? Don't we post this on the web somewhere?
Why?
Yeah.
Can we, this is Q1. No, I just don't understand why there would be a 6 or 7 week lag.
Oh, I don't know. I would.
Historically, that's been it for over 5 different managers. That's always it. Part of the
That's why
problem
we're going
is
through
getting,
managers.
getting valuations from the alternative advisors, getting the accruals, getting the dividends receivable, and coordination with the custodian and stuff.
Can we just get it whenever it's ready?
I'd ask if that timeline shouldn't be tighter, because I think,
Well, with a new, I'd be curious as to when Callan's going to be able to turn around the
I mean-
October 1st report, let's say.
the timelines even for the alternative investments have been tightened up very dramatically over the past number of years, so I'd be surprised if they have that much latitude, that it takes them that long to get a price
I
out.
just received the valuation for March 31st and one of them last week.
You might have just received it, but I tend to doubt that's when it was completed. Yeah.
One thing, because Brian, you just brought something up, mumbling, but is this report posted on the town website?
Yes.
It is on the town website, on a regular update. If I went there,
We
I'd
would
have this
attempt
one
to, yes.
up there now?
Yeah,
Okay,
will
good.
do.
Okay.
Okay. Cool, thank you, gentlemen, I appreciate it. Is there any, I'm not going to allow questioning from the public, but I do want to, is there any questions, comments, or concerns? Anybody have anything? No? I want to thank you guys for coming tonight. Brian, thank you. I know you had other
you.
engagement. I appreciate your time. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
All right. The next item we're going to go to is the subcommittee report on the Fairfield Metro Center project. Yeah. We'll do the budget right after that, because I know there's some members of the audience. Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Kiley, who's the chairman of that subcommittee. So,
Okay.
Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Chairman Flynn. I have just a very brief update for the committee on where we are, what we've done, and where we're going. The first thing I'd like to do is I do want to thank Mr. Brockfeld and Mrs. Leclerc for all their hard work, all their efforts. We've been chugging away. To date, we have met 3 times. We've had 3 meetings. We've probably spent 10, 12 hours in those meetings. And during the course of those meetings, we've been mainly accumulating data, and we're in the diligence phase, is what I would call it. Our next meeting is Friday of this week at 4 o'clock. Anyone cares to attend, we're meeting in the second floor of the conference room, or the second floor conference room in Independence Hall. And behind that, our next meeting is next Wednesday, August 3rd, and that's at 6 o'clock, and that'll be in the basement conference room of Independence Hall. So we've got 2 meetings coming up, Friday and Wednesday. We're trying to compact our schedule as much as we can so that we can get through this process as quickly as possible. The other comment I'd like to make is, and I'd like to thank Mr. Tetro and his administration and all the department heads who have been very helpful and very cooperative with all the requests that we have made, the questions that have been asked of them, and the inquiries that have been made by the CPA firm Koskin Rufkus, specifically Mr. Joe Santafanti, who's the lead auditor on this project for us. So everyone's working hard, everyone's moving along, but as the case is with any audit, you don't know till you know, right? So as we ask questions and as we get data and get answers, sometimes they close points out, and sometimes they raise more questions. So we're still going through that process. After we finish the diligence phase, we will go into what I call the review and the workshop phase, and that's where we will collaborate on both the narrative, and we will collaborate the narrative that the committee is going to put together on top of the narrative that the audit firm is going to put together, which will sit on top of all the documents and reporting and the accounting schedules and the supporting data. From that point, we're on a time frame. It's still a little open. Our goal, I think we're going to have somewhere between 4 and 5 more meetings. That's kind of a guesstimate at this point in time. If we can accomplish our work in those 4 or 5 meetings over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, our goal is to have a report completed and out to town bodies the week of Monday, August 22nd. Could be a couple days before, or it could be in that week. We're working hard to make sure that we get to that deadline. And as per Chairman Flynn's comments and First Selectman Tetro's comments a while back, you know, we're working hard to produce a report that's complete and accurate and will give everyone the results that they desire, a good end product. And it's just going to take some more time. I mean, there's just no way around that. That's really the update. Mr. Hiller brought with him tonight, it wasn't my intent to deliver this report tonight or to review this report, but Mr. Hiller did print it, and it is on your desks. And there is an electronic copy that's been distributed, and this sits on the town website. This is hot off the press from only a few hours back today. This is the most recent updated financial document that we've worked from. There's a number of schedules here, vendor payments, payments by category, and payments for each project, the intersection project and the Metro train station project. So this report is not complete. There's a number of open items on this report. No, it has not been vetted. In fact, this report will be the topic for our meeting Friday at 4 o'clock. Friday's meeting at 4 o'clock is specifically to go through this document with Mr. Santafanti, clean it up, close it out, so that we can use this as supporting data for the narrative in the next couple steps in our process. So this is for your reading. And that's really it, Mr. Flynn. That's where we are. We're moving as quickly as we can, but we're also being as diligent as possible to make sure that we completely understand all the funds, all the flows of funds, the processes, the controls, and so that we can produce a report that's complete and comprehensive.
Thank you, Mr. Kiley. I'll turn it over to, does Mrs. Leclerc or Mr. Brockfeld have anything to add at this point? No? Okay.
I just would say on a personal note that you made a very good choice in asking Mr. Kiley to head the committee.
Thank you.
Because he's done an outstanding job so far.
Thank you. I'm sure you all have.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members of Mr. Kiley at this point? Seeing none, Mr. Tetra, can I ask you to briefly talk about what's going on to date from your side of the fence on the Metro Center project? I just want to make sure the board is aware that what the administration is up to at the same time.
Thank you. I think from the top, we've done a few things since the June 27th report. One, our team is meeting every day. We have a standing meeting at 4 o'clock to get updates as to where we are on different initiatives to make sure that stays front and center for everybody. Second, on a weekly basis, every Monday, we sit down with Mr. Hiller and his team and tie out the financials to make sure that the numbers tie out to both what we're doing on the project side versus what we're seeing on the financial side. We are meeting with, we had meetings today with DOT. We have ongoing meetings with BlackRock in terms of, we met with DEP to look at potential sites for disposing of some of the contaminated soil. We've met with DECD, and forgive me, based on the reorg of government, those letters all changed, but those were the historical acronyms for those departments, to look at potential funding for loans that are available for brownfield cleanup. In addition, we've hired a construction manager who started Monday, and we're very excited about that. Obviously, there's a short period left on this. It's not like we can work magic with that. As I think one of the questions I had earlier from someone was that, has the horse already left the barn? And I think that at the very least here, we want to make sure no more horses get out. If we can, in fact, achieve any savings with that, this gives us our best shot at doing that. And then, in addition to that, we're looking to 2 different attorneys. One attorney to provide an opinion on the approval process that was followed through this. This was an initiative at the Board of Selectmen meeting 2 meetings ago where we brought that up. And in addition to that, we're looking at an attorney that would help review the contract and help us identify what the various clauses are and what any cost obligations are based on different options. Just for the record, both attorneys have not done any work for the town in the past.
Mr. Tetra, on that, one of the items we had mentioned for the audit is if during the course of their review, they had any legal questions that came up, or just things that, obviously, they're accountants, not auditors, so, or accountants, not lawyers, so they don't render legal opinions. Would you like, if they have a question, a series of questions, what have you, would you like those to go directly to the administration? Would you like them to go directly to a third-party attorney? How would you like to handle that, should they have?
My suggestion, I guess, would be that if the chair would send those to me, then we could identify, just again, as a control, much like we did with the 58 questions.
Yep.
As a control to make sure that we can get those answered or not, and we get that back to you right away, and then let you know what the timing is for getting that answered, so that everybody's on the same page. In addition, I guess, as hopefully most of you know, we have continued to kind of fill in the blanks on the 58/60 questions, and are continuing to work through that list. We're kind of down to what I call the heavy-duty workload ones, which is, and let me paraphrase, give us every email from January 1st of this year to, present day, from these people to these people about these topics. And that is a little bit problematic in terms of how to do those. There's certainly some computer searches you can do. That the issue then becomes, do we have to review each one of those to make sure that we don't have any issues with any, as was the case in the past, any employee confidential information that accidentally gets distributed as part of that. So we're looking at how best to collect that information and how best to distribute it.
Okay, thank you. And I assume the administration and your body and all that, there's constant flow of communication to make sure that you're getting the information you need, the auditor's getting the information they need, and vice versa.
We've had a good
Yeah.
process on that.
Good.
Yeah, I think that
I'll get you.
I think I've attended each of your meetings so far, maybe not the full meeting in some cases
Yes,
due
you
to
have,
other
sir.
conflicts,
Yeah.
but
Thank you for that, too.
the communication has been pretty straightforward.
Great.
I would agree.
Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. We've been getting a lot of the correspondence, and I appreciate the interest of the questions and the answers. Are we going to have one big wrap-up file with all the answers to the 60 questions? Because it's been sporadic. This is the answer to 1 through 4, and this is the answer to 5, and this is the answer to 25.
Yeah, I just recently sent out an update on the 50, that the challenge is not the document with the 50 questions on them and the short form answers.
Yeah.
It's all the additional documentation and that type of thing, and we can certainly explore that with we have it all, so from
Yep.
that standpoint. I think we
Maybe
can
like a
explore that.
spreadsheet with everything hyperlinked in it. I mean, it might be, 80 meg, right? Or-
With your permission, let us talk to our IT department to see if there's some way to set up a link or something that you can go to and
That would be
see
great.
all that.
Thank you.
I don't know that it's cost prohibitive or not. Sometimes within our, within my business, when we're doing a project, we actually set up a data room. We have somebody, a third-party provider, put up a data room for a limited period of time. And then you provide access to that data room, and people can go in and review the documents. A thought. I'm not sure how.
Conceptually, I think we're talking about the same thing, though
Yeah,
I'm
we
not
might be.
technical enough to guarantee that.
Right, right. No, and that way you're not dealing with the volume of information. It's out there and they come and access it.
Yeah, I believe that would be my understanding of one of the options we've discussed, and probably the most likely option.
Yeah, yeah, because you're right. It's a volume of files and things.
And there'll be certain things like, some of the, all the email questions are just going to be hard. We have to figure out how to get through those and make sure we protect any employees on that side,
Right.
while also meeting the FOI requirements to make sure that all the information which is available does get out.
Right.
I believe the data room, as you refer to it, was one of the ways we talked about making all those emails available, so that we didn't have to send out CDs to everybody, or because some of those questions, again, we haven't done the searches yet. I suspect in all cases, it sounds like a large number of emails for each of those questions. And I want to make sure, Mr. DeWitt, that you're able to read all those and spend the time necessary to review those. So.
There's a lot of stuff. I mean,
see that with an evil grin on your face.
yeah.
Mr. Brown, did you have a question? Yeah.
I'm curious, and I might have missed it. Who did we hire, if you can tell me, Mr. Tetra, as a construction manager?
Oh, Bud Barton.
Wood Barton. And has he or his firm worked with us before?
No.
Okay, all right. And I'm sure he has his marching orders? Exactly. All right, thank you.
Any other questions from board members for the first selectman on this topic? If you could stay there for a second, I want to talk about a couple of house cleaning items, and I could, housekeeping, not cleaning. Couple things.
I don't do windows.
There you go. Number one, there's been some question or comment from members of the board about perhaps attaining a tour of the site. Is that something that we can make possible? We don't want everybody traipsing through at one time, break it down into, smaller groups or whatever, but I think some board members have represented that it would be helpful to see where the site currently stands and what needs to be done. So if we could work with your office or Mr. Hiller to arrange that. That'd be good. Any problems with that?
I don't see that as a problem.
I've spoken, I spoke with you briefly, and Mr. Barnhart.
Yeah. Yeah, haven't
I
spoken
think
to
one of
Mr.
the
Barnhart.
things, and not to avoid it, but obviously, if we could set a couple of dates,
Right.
and so that we're not setting up an official meeting, but, and
Right.
limit it to 2 or 3 people at a time.
Mr. Chair, if I can reference back to a February meeting that you, myself, and I think Mr. Bolito toured the site on, the issue is just a vehicle for getting around. We're not taking a bus in there, so perhaps if we could do 2 or 3 folks at a time, that fits readily into a vehicle with a driver that can kind of explain the site as we're going through, would be if that was convenient for the board.
No, thank you. The other item is one of timing. We've worked pretty closely with Mr. Tetro as well as the leadership of the RTM. And, unfortunately, they're coming to a point perhaps where a decision may be brought forward or a recommendation from the administration on what next steps are vis-à-vis keeping this project moving along. With that in mind, the only date that appears to work for a special Board of Finance meeting and to get this to the RTM, if it happens to have to go there, would be Friday, August 26th. Yeah, that's right. It's a Friday evening meeting, special meeting.
We're used to it on our committees.
Right.
We're having one this week.
Right. Show-offs. To review specifically one item on the agenda, and that would be the Metro Center project. The goal would be to obviously review the report, to discuss with the first selectman and the Board of Selectmen whatever actions they have taken as of that date, and if it so happens that we have a motion in front of us, to do whatever we will with that motion, with the RTM scheduled to hold special sessions on the Monday and Tuesday of the following week. I think we can go into this with the expectation that it would be a lengthy meeting, and with that in mind, starting earlier, I think, would be better. So I'm looking for recommendations from this body as to how early we could start on that Friday.
Meeting would be solely for that purpose.
Solely for that purpose, nothing else on the agenda. We would certainly have our auditors there to review the report. We'd certainly have Mr. Tetro there, certainly Mr. Hiller there, like Mr. Barnhart there, and other legal representatives as necessary.
We'll
Bond
make sure the-
counsel has been reserved for that date.
We'll make sure the appropriate folks are there. Just, Mr. Chair, if I might?
Please.
I'd ask for your consideration. It obviously a very special request, a very unique set of circumstances, and certainly it's asking a lot of this board to meet beyond, and I certainly still remember how many hours we met during the spring and budget season to do all this. Simply put, within the project, in order not to exceed our authorized expenditure, at some point in early September, we reached the limit of the dollars that we are allowed to spend under the current resolutions. In order to maximize the amount of time that we have to explore options, firm up alternatives, and present as much concrete to you as we can, we're asking for as much time in August to do that. We're just trying to maximize the days we have to prepare versus the decision time. What that does is compress everything down. I made a proposal to your chair as well as the moderator of the RTM, have not heard back. I believe Mr. Steele might be on vacation this week.
He is.
We discussed this briefly, but we formalized and said, look, if the Board of Selectmen can meet on August 24th, we then allow the 25th for certain events. We then meet on the 26th with the Board of Finance. We then go to the RTM, and my proposal to Mr. Steele was that if the RTM would consider it, to have a meeting of the Committee of the Whole on Monday night, which allows us to do the whole presentation for the RTM in one body, and then convene the official RTM meeting on Tuesday night. The idea is that Monday night's going to be all presentation and questions anyway. There's not likely that we would get to a vote that night. So as long as we're doing it 2 nights, we spread it out, they're close enough together. The rationale being between the presentation in June, where we gave everybody a heads up as to where we are, between going through and responding to the 58, 60 questions and providing additional information, as well as having time to think through this individually, that perhaps that compressed meeting schedule would work without challenging anyone too much to have time to review the information.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this? Mr. Kiley?
Just quickly, I mean, it seems reasonable. I mean, our committee still has a lot of work that we need to get done in the next 2.5 weeks to meet that deadline. I'm relatively confident we can get that done, but there are no guarantees. But that aside, it sounds like a reasonable and a fair solution and a schedule. My question is, when our committee completes the report, let's say it's, well, obviously it's prior to that night that we meet.
It's got to be prior to the
Right.
24th.
To the 24th, right. Do you envision us, our committee, reporting directly back to this board only, or the Board of Selectmen first? I'm not quite sure how that process will flow.
Yeah.
All right. I think we'd be very open to hearing your report on the 24th if that were possible.
Okay. That's your normal Wednesday afternoon Board of Selectmen slot? Or it's
I
a
don't
Board
know
of...
if it's normal, but
but
we're going to
we're
figure
gonna
out
make
how
it
to
work.
meet then.
Okay.
And we will meet, certainly if there were a time
If
that
it
were
has to
more
be at
convenient
night,
for you,
yeah.
we will make the
Right.
time to be more convenient for you.
No, that's fine. So we would need to be prepared to present to the Board of Selectmen, and then prepare and present again on Friday night to this board. But along with that presentation Friday night, potentially, in addition to what we present to this board, there could also be a presentation, there could be very well a presentation from Mr. Tetro for a funding request.
Yeah, the plan now would be to give the bodies an update as to where we are, step through the alternatives we've evaluated, identify what the options are for proceeding or not, along with the various cost options,
Right.
and make a recommendation.
Okay. And then, following that one more step, on Monday night, would we, as a committee, need to report a third time to the RTM committee at-large meeting? Or would we encourage them to attend our Friday meeting to get that presentation? Or should we plan on doing it 3 times? That's kind of my question.
Yeah, and my view is you should plan on doing it 3 times. We would certainly ask for members of the RTM to attend our meeting on that Friday. But I think you should probably plan on doing it 3 times. And in the scope of work that we gave to the auditors, we very clearly spelled out the fact that they should be prepared to make themselves available to all 3 bodies,
Right.
including subcommittees of the RTM.
Okay.
So we specifically stated Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, RTM, and RTM subcommittees.
Okay.
So the expectation would be that they would be available as well,
Yeah.
and would do the bulk of the presentation.
Right. That seems like the cleaner way of doing it.
Yeah.
Being prepared to do it 3 times in some format for each of the 3 bodies, which would allow us to concentrate on each body for each meeting, so that there weren't a number of Board of Finance members at the Board of Selectmen meeting, asking questions. They could wait for their meeting on Friday, and likewise, the RTM members, while they could come on Friday to listen, they could possibly save the majority of their questions for their own meeting on Monday.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Thanks.
It's not pleasant, it's a long
Yeah.
grind,
Long
but
haul,
it's,
yeah,
a-
it's
but
a
it's.
grind.
Mr. Polito, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a way to do this so you guys don't have to do 3 presentations. The fact that you're a subcommittee, can you not do a special subcommittee meeting for the specific purpose of doing the presentation once, have all the members of the boards and bodies, you get a room big enough that we can accommodate everybody, and do this once? And then, obviously, each board would have to, do individual meetings for questions and votes, but it just seems to do this presentation 3 times there's got to be a way to get around that.
That's
my hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's reasonable to assume, based on the schedules that we've looked at, that the various people are going to be available for each of those between the three bodies, between the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM. I don't think we can reasonably presume that people are going to be available at any one time for those nights.
It hasn't worked that way in the past very well.
Right.
And ideally, one of the ways would be to do the committee report earlier at another meeting, but you're in the same box that we are, in the sense of trying to maximize as much time to complete the report and be as thorough as possible.
Right.
But coming up against the meeting dates at the end of the month. So,
Right.
Again, we are asking a lot of volunteers that have contributed a lot. And if there were another way around this, I'm certainly open to suggestions, but in sitting, looking at the calendars, matching up vacation schedules of, I'm not going to say we matched them up for everybody, but certainly key players in this. It's been difficult to fit it all in, and I don't know another way. So.
No, and I think, yeah, and that's a problem. And I also think, although I think it's a great idea and you'd love to do it, you're not going to prevent the people that couldn't make that presentation from asking the question at their own meeting before they're asked to vote on it, if they're asked to vote on something. And at that point, you're just being redundant as well to the entire group.
I mean, at some point down the road, when we have a little bit more technology capability, potentially you could do it once on Fair TV and make it available on demand for everybody to kind of review that at their leisure, so they come just to the meeting with questions. And you might consider that as an option, but I don't mean to speak for Fair TV, and I don't mean to speak certainly for your committee in terms of evaluating
Yeah,
that.
well, no, thank you for those comments and those thoughts, and, I mean, we will get it done.
It's not the best of circumstances, but it is very important. So, what else? Any other questions, comments, concerns? Anything that I've forgotten on this list of items? All right. Seeing none, I'll go to the public. No questions. I don't want to take questions on this, but if anybody has a comment they'd like to raise, feel free. Mr. Ambrose, please.
Chair, just for my edification, the understanding therefore is that...
Do you want to take the mic?
Sure. For my edification, the understanding therefore is to have a joint subcommittee meeting of the RTM on the 29th of August, and to have our regular meeting on the 30th of August.
I'll ask Mr.
That was my proposal to Moderator Steele. I have not heard back, so I don't know how viable that is, but that seemed to work since we're planning on having an RTM meeting over 2 days, because it was assumed that the amount of discussion and questions would warrant that.
Yeah. Okay. I have not had a chance to speak to Jeff Steele because he's on vacation, but I can email him, and if there's a problem, obviously get back to you.
Right. That'd be great. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mostly comments and concerns. Please, anybody? Okay. Good evening.
Good evening. George Basaka, Fairfield.
Can you give your address too,
Yeah,
please?
472 Old Mill Road, Fairfield,
Thank you.
06824. While the preliminary draft that I had received appears to raise some important questions, the preliminary draft of the audit, I'm concerned as to whether it will eventually provide the information that's necessary to determine whether the town will be liable to pay for any excess costs. Under the state-town agreement, there's no doubt that the town would be liable for excess costs incurred on the state-town project, most of which involves construction of the road. The state-town project, the state-town agreement expressly provides that none of the work covered by the town developer project is to be included in the state-town project, and also that none of the money contributed by the state may be used for anything other than the state-town project. That being true, it seems to me the only way to determine who is responsible for excess costs would be to examine each item that has been spent in order to determine whether it should be allocated to the state town project or the town developer project. If the result of that effort is that there was an overrun on the state town project, then under that agreement, the town would be liable for the excess cost. On the other hand, if it's found that the overrun occurred on the town developer project, then I do not believe the town should be liable for any excess costs incurred on that project. I base that conclusion on the reasons I've set forth in a paper that I will provide to the board tonight. I would therefore urge the subcommittee and the board to instruct the auditor to examine each expenditure to determine to which project it should be allocated. Without that information, I don't think the audit would be complete. I know you have a time deadline, but it would seem better to me to take a little longer to avoid the town paying for something for which it might not be liable. And I think the only way to know that is to determine which project each item should be allocated to. If you have any questions of me, I'd be glad to remain.
Thank you for your comments. Any questions, comments, concerns? No, so you're going to have to give that to the clerk, and he'll pass those out to the board. Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Yeah, Mr. Mayor?
That was interesting, but only from the perspective that, based on my limited knowledge here, my first meeting here, but knowing that there's R2 agreements, I kind of assumed the audit would differentiate expenses by the two contracts. So my question is, are we? I think that's an appropriate question.
Go ahead, Mr. Kiley. You're going to answer on behalf of the subcommittee.
The answer is yes. We have instructed the auditor to break out the expenses per project, and he is already provided us a draft in that direction, which categorizes expenses by category and by project.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other question, comments, concerns? Mr. Belita?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Attorney Basaka's point, Mr. Tetro, the outside counsel that you are engaging to look at the contractual elements of this project, are they going to be looking specifically at what Attorney Basaka has been talking about?
Yes. I mean, they're doing a review of the contracts to determine what our obligations are.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Brown?
No, just on Friday night, August 26th, when will we set up a time? Or come to an agreement on a time of what?
I know you had expressed some concern about
Being too
ability to
early.
get here, yeah.
Right.
Would 6 PM work for everybody? Mr.,
I'm the exact opposite. I'm not going to be here.
yeah, we can't, I can't get here earlier than 5. I know.
6 works for me, for what it's worth.
Does anybody else, what are your days look like that day?
5, 6, whatever.
Friday the 26th.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, you're pretty open, Mr. Brockfeld?
Flexible. Earlier is better.
Okay, Mr. Brockfeld?
Just because I think it's going to be a pretty lengthy.
Okay. Mr. Mayor,
Fine. I'll be there.
whatever.
Be late
Yeah.
anyway.
Tell them 5 will be okay.
What,
No, I want to go on record that I was here on time tonight. I might have been one of the first members of the Board of Finance to walk through that door.
I'm speechless. Mr. Stone.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, well, let me, Mrs. Leclerc, do you have anything?
I'm fine with Whatever time is fine.
Okay. So I will get back to you with a time. I will take the pleasure of the board and get back to you with a time. I appreciate your flexibility. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? Seeing none, Mr. Tetra, thank you for the update. Mr. Kiley, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
And to the entire subcommittee, thank you for all your hard work and long hours on this. It's greatly appreciated. I know you guys have spent a fair amount of time now, and I know it's only just the beginning, so I appreciate you taking on the task. That's it for that item right now. So we're going to move to review the current status of the fiscal year 2011 budget. As of the end of that fiscal year, June 30th, 2011, obviously, Mr. Hiller, these are preliminary numbers subject to audit, correct?
Yes, they are preliminary numbers. As I say, they have not, though the audit has commenced, actually it commenced in May, when they started to come in and do some of their initial testing, and we're working on things, and obviously significant or key members of our audit team have been diverted onto the other project which we've just discussed. Mrs. Gardner is here this evening. We presented in the similar format or identical format that we have for the last, I believe, 2 years or a year and a half at least. This format that the board is, and I still consider it somewhat of a work in progress. I am reasonably confident, quite confident, in fact, that we've had a successful year. We, excuse me, as Mr. Tetro and I brought to the rating agencies earlier this month, prediction of a significant increase in our undesignated fund balance, and that still appears to be the case. There are innumerable entries still to be made. I think we have, for the most part, accounted for most of the revenue. There's some, I've been playing telephone tag with the state on a couple of items, and most of the expenses have been accounted for. I have also talked, and though it's not on the agenda, with the Board of Education. They do not intend to return any of their allocation for the current year. There will be approximately $25,000 coming back from them on purchase orders from the prior year, from fiscal 10, which were not utilized. And so there is, and that is often the case with the Board of Education.
They also did not use, however, in fairness to them, they did not use.
They did not use the
contingency.
$328,500 that the board had set aside within the contingency account for that purpose. I'm open to any questions. I think it's easier to perhaps go through questions than go through line by line.
Before I turn it over, you had said a significant increase in the undesignated fund balance. Where do we stand?
We estimated $1.5 million.
I'm sorry, $1.5 million better, right?
Better,
Right, that's not the balance.
better.
Better. Okay, so $1.5 million better than where we originally had projected to be at the
Correct.
end of the year. And that was mostly made up through expense saves as opposed to,
Primarily in expense savings, yes. Key revenue lines, I think, as we indicated, we're under on several revenue lines. One of the things that skews off the revenue lines, obviously, is the solid waste issue, which is offset by reduction in expenditures. As we indicated in the narrative here, the tax line, we're on current year taxes is slightly under our target. That was primarily because the senior tax relief program was in excess of $200,000 more than we had originally budgeted for that line. A portion of that, a portion of that is offset by the elderly tax relief program, elderly tax relief grant from the state. There was a significant overage in revenue on the prior year tax revenue, and also on the interest income earned on delinquent taxes.
Paul, on the current year levy, can you remind me what was our budgeted collection rate this past year, and what's our budgeted collection rate this current?
We've been hovering right plus, around the 98.9.
Is that what we budgeted, though, for this
Yes.
next year? Okay, so we budgeted 98.9, and we hit,
90, actually, this past year was 98.86.
and this year we budgeted 98.9, and that's what we hit for this last year. Right?
Correct. I'm sorry, I reversed that. It was 98.92 last year, and we came in around 98.9.
And we
98,
budget, and what did we
98.86
budget this current year,
current year.
98.9?
I'm sorry?
What did we budget for fiscal year 12?
98.86
So we
for
took it down.
fiscal 12.
Okay. Please, everyone, yeah, Bob, do you have a question?
Well, the big town savers were in the health insurance. $1.3 million in each the actives and the retirees, for a total of $2.6 million, just from those two line items alone. Have you looked at the experience? Is it intensity, or is it visits, or is it?
We have not received from Aon, the last report that we've received from Aon was based on the Mayfair, so we do not have the final numbers there. We were seeing improvement, continual improvement throughout the year. I think, you weren't on the board. You may have been on the board when the last budget was adopted. I'm not certain.
No.
No. That's right. But I think this board made a concerted effort in the budget adopted for fiscal 11 to fully fund the estimates that Aon had presented. I think these figures begin to show that. I think the other thing, too, is that we did see improvement in experience.
Yeah, I was wondering, obviously it was a proven experience, like significant, but, well, I was wondering, the union contracts.
Could you use the mic, Bob?
I'm sorry. The union contracts, I know there's been some changes, but I'm sorry I haven't been keeping up with it. They require greater co-pays or anything? Was there any changes in the plans?
There were
that-
fractionally higher co-pays, but I don't think this, that would not drive this. I think one of the things that we have had some experience on, there were, in many departments, a number of vacancies that existed throughout the year. So we frankly, we had budgeted for people that we didn't have on the payroll. And so there were some savings generated through that. But that's always because we're taking 100% of the insurance cost for a position, which didn't exist. We had, several vacancies, for example, in the police department. We had vacancies, not for the full year, but we had vacancies in my department, the building department, the town clerk department. The list goes on and on and on, of various departments in which vacancies were there, and yet we were fully funding the premium for that period of time. The only thing we weren't getting, obviously, which is the employee co-share on that premium, but we've never done an analysis on that, but there's some pretty good savings there.
Yeah, I mean, there's two or three significant factors that go into that. It's the number of visits and the intensity of the diagnostics, whether it's catastrophic or whatever. It'd be interesting. Do you remember what the increase in the budget was this year over the prior year?
I don't off the top of my head, unless Mrs. Gardner has that figure available.
Do you know if any of this is savings from the run out of the prior period versus savings this year? or-
I think it's really just actual savings, is less utilization.
That's great.
And however, I will say this, we did have a number of cases which triggered the stop loss, which is $150,000. I don't recall the exact number, I can get that to the board. We perhaps had 5 cases on the town side which triggered the stop loss on an individual basis.
And
It's
and
great
just to
experience.
interject, we funded high. Aon gave us a number and gave us a range, and we shot high. So
I think what this is
that was
showing, and I
the
think
right
one
thing
of
to do,
the
right? Or not the
discussions
right
that
thing
we've
to do,
had
depending on how you want to run out.
with Aon, and it also demonstrates why the Board of Education had a $5 million excess in their policy going into this past fiscal year on their fund here. We were accepting Aon's numbers for November, and that's basically what this board adopted from a budgetary standpoint. The Board of Ed had been doing that for several years, and obviously, as you're well aware as to what happened with the 1.6 million that they pulled back this year, but they were only able to do that because they had, I believe, 4 years of accepting the November numbers from Aon.
What had also happened, Paul, and let's go back to the comments of whether it was the right thing to do. We developed on the town side a significant deficit within the town internal service fund accounts by not sticking with the insurance numbers and by doing the own numbers as recommended by the administration. So 2 years ago, this board made the decision to fund up to the level as recommended by the outside consultants because we were in that deficit situation. The only thing that saved us from having a problem within the internal service fund from the prior years is the fact that for those prior years, as you'll recall, because you were on the Board of Education was funding at the experts' requested level. So while this is good news, and I'm very anxious to see where the internal service fund balance now sits as of June 30th, 2011, and that roll forward schedule we get, we're still not out of the woods yet on the internal service fund because we had like a $900,000 deficit on a cash basis on the town side of the internal service fund. We've also had continued issues with the workers' comps claims as evidenced by the fact that they're $758,000 over budget in the past year, which we were aware of from about 6 months ago that was going on. So we had a dramatic impact on that level. So it'd be very interested to see that internal service fund.
It's going to be interesting. I think there's 2 factors here. Obviously, there's significant improvement on the town health side. There was improvement on the Board of Ed health side as they went along, and they didn't burn as much of the 1.6 as they anticipated.
But remember, the other unknown that they have, that they put in this budget, is they raised their stop loss.
That's for fiscal 12.
That's for fiscal 12. So they raised their stop loss, I think, from 150 to 300,000. So the impact on that could be interesting.
Yeah, I remember the battles we used to have over those fund balances on the internal service.
I think the big
Bob,
number.
you ain't seen nothing.
Yeah, right.
Is the town still insuring the Board of Ed?
Self-insuring?
They're still in that fund that's tracked separately, but the internal service fund is managed collectively and evaluated collectively, yes.
And if there's money that is saved, it comes back to the town?
We're currently in the process of reviewing that agreement. I know the first selectman's been intimately involved in working with the superintendent of schools to rectify that
So
situation.
that's still, that's interesting.
Open dialogue.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
DeWitt?
Chair.
I'm sorry, Bob, were you not?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again. And just let me, my quarterly praise of Munis sheets, because the only way that I'm going to be able to give this little dissertation that I'm going to give is because I have this data that we never had before. And when Bob was around the first time. It's, as a budget subcommittee member with Mr. Bolito and Mr. Stone, I'm amazed that I look at these things and still are surprised, right, and didn't think of these things before. But, you know, I'm amazed how we look at these budgets and we get a roll-up from Linda that says, you know, oh, the fire department's only 285,000 worse than budget. But when you look at the individual budget lines, you know, it's their individual budget lines, they just blow them completely. And I'm concerned that we're not managing within the budget lines, even though we profess to look at each budget line, and the RTM professes to, man, we dig in every budget line and knock it back, and we kind of just, you know, it kind of just rolls up in the end. And one that I just saw tonight that I hadn't seen before, and I'm going to look through all the rest of them, I particularly feel, and I'm using the word bamboozled, I've been mulling the word around, by the information technology. So the last time Ms. Gardner provided us our sheets, there was no line item for IT contingency. But all of a sudden there is for $50,000. So, and there's 100 pieces of data in here that I can't possibly go through, but I feel like this budget's been padded on some line items, just so at the end of the year, you can roll up a $50,000 addition to get him to 99%. He mismanaged almost every line item in his budget to the detriment of some, to the positive of another, and then spent $50,000 on who knows what, IT contingency. So, as far as I'm concerned, we left like 60 grand on the table, just that budget. So I'm just concerned how we can't, and yeah, I would appreciate hearing what you think. These individual budget line items are just horrific. But somehow they magically roll up to be 100% at the end of the year, right?
Just a couple of things. First of all, I want to let you know that your Munis year-to-date reports are even preliminary. And some of the data reflected in my summary and on my little report, what we call seasonality report,
Right.
are adjusted for these invoices that are in process and are not in your Munis reports. So
Okay.
don't take those as final. Those numbers, if they don't
Understood.
match my
And we haven't done our
report, it's
transfers yet
because
and all that, right?
I've done a kind of a quick calculation to get you
Understand.
as quickly as, to get you more up to date. The second thing is, Munis does allow for, and we have implemented, what are called roll-ups. You use the exact right term.
Right.
And what happens is there are certain accounts that we allow to roll up, so you can go over in one as long as you're under in another, and they net out. Those were determined when we set up the Munis program, and I believe I don't remember if it was last year or the year prior, you started accepting or approving budgets in whole, not necessarily through line items, because you would say a $50,000 cut and let the department head decide where to take it. So you weren't really approving the budget by line item as you had in the past.
Okay.
So I think that is how department managers then manage their budget. So I agree with you.
Yes.
So I agree. Line to line.
Right.
There are definitely variances.
And I agree with you that we approved a top budget for the IT department.
Yes.
But we do have a breakdown
Yes.
from the first selectman's office that says, you know what? I plussed up this account $17,200, or I took this account down. And again, so I wonder to myself, there's $50,000 that was spent between this report and this report. And I understand they're not to the dollar, and I get it, but it's $50,000, so something happened, right? A whole new line item showed up.
Right.
And I'm wondering if our IT director spent $50,000 on something that the first selectman said in his budget cuts, I don't think you should have bought that. And I wonder if that $50,000 wouldn't have been better off coming back to us at the end of the year.
I will review that carefully for you, and my best recollection was that he was moving items from one account to another to more, what he called more properly represent where they should be. I don't know if that's this.
There was a whole new line
You're right.
item. That's
And
why I'm
I-
picking this one out, right?
I will check this.
I'm particularly,
Oh,
I know I
absolutely.
pick on
No.
IT all the time,
No.
but this is a whole new line item between February and
Gotcha.
in
No,
July, right?
That's
And it's the same thing, when you look at, look at fire. We underran regular payroll by $130,000, only to overrun all the OT by almost 500.
But you have to remember that those are the vacancies.
I
That
understand.
surplus in regular payroll is vacancies that are compensated for by having people work overtime.
I'm with you. That's why we
So
need to have the
we always
discussion
know-
about hiring the 4 firemen or whatever the number is, so
Right.
that 125 is really 125 and not 300 because it's time and a
Yes,
half, right?
Yes. Yes, you're right. We've had that discussion over and over.
So without more time to look at, I might email you with a couple more, but
Yes, yes, absolutely, and I'll start right on the
I appreciate
IT,
that.
no problem.
And I would request of my budget subcommittee chairman that we dive into that line by line, and I'm totally with you. We don't approve line by line, but we do have it in front of us, so it's,
And could I interject one other comment? And I know it's late, and then I
Sure.
will wrap up. I have to give my thanks to our first selectman, Mr. Tetro. We sat down today, and I just wanted to let you know that this report is going to be changing a little bit, and I just want to clue you in on how it might be changing. When we selected these seasonality key accounts, we selected them because they were so large that even a slight percentage variance would greatly impact the budget. Or because they were a line that, they were an account that were very volatile, and we wanted to watch them. Or they were perennially in trouble, and you know which ones I'm referring to. So we selected those. So when we were summing up the unders, overs of the seasonal key accounts, they were only net of the seasonal key accounts. And also, the other problem in logic, if you will, some of the seasonal accounts, key accounts, are not just general fund accounts. They're internal service fund accounts, and they're self-supporting fund accounts. You can't mix these funds, so you can't get net numbers. So what we will be doing, with the guidance of the first selectman, is I'm going to be keeping the seasonal accounts we have decided upon, but breaking them into their funds. And the explanations will be net of the individual funds. So they might be grouped a little bit differently. So the next time you see them, they may not be in the same order or the same place. But I think it'll give you a more realistic picture. You'll know how we're doing in the general fund. The question of how much are you contributing to the undesignated surplus will be clear to you. Because I think Mr. Mayer's question went to that when he was pointing out surpluses in the internal service fund, which really don't contribute to the
General
surplus that
funds,
Mr.
right.
Hiller's talking about in the general fund. And that's all I'll say.
Thank
Just
you.
wanted you to note that.
Thank you very much. And I think, Mr. DeWitt, to follow up on your point, the line item of miscellaneous sticks out like a sore thumb. Right, and that's the issue. It's like, the miscellaneous fund is the accountant's worst nightmare. So, the use of that fund just tells you
line item being added in a very.
3/4 of the way through the year.
Well, right, it is
Right.
called IT contingency. I don't like that word contingency either.
It's called miscellaneous, actually, miscellaneous IT contingency.
So, I mean, that's
Right,
the one that jumped out at me, so.
yeah, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Brockfeld?
Just a quick request of
Could
either
you-
Linda or Paul. When we get a report like this at this point in time, right, you're saying that it's not finalized, right?
Yes, we're still.
No, I understand. No, I understand that. Is there any way for us to know, when you give us this report on this evening, right, which of these numbers are hard numbers and which ones are still subject to
I think
being
the ones that we
All
could say
subject to
without
audit.
question are hard
I know
numbers
that's subject to audit, but they know.
are all of the payroll lines. All of the payroll lines are hard numbers within any given department or something. And this report doesn't break it out this way because it's dependent upon that. So anything that, and if, if you look at,
I don't think we want to go line by line, Paul.
I don't need to go line by line, but it goes all the way down through the
You have to keep the last one.
Right.
I'm sorry. That's the only way I do it.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
I begged.
So all of those are final, including the benefit lines within there as far as Social Security, obviously, health insurance. So those would all be final.
Oh, okay, I got you.
And everything
Finalized
else
is
has got
final.
some little
Right.
tweaks to it.
Did you, Bob Stone, did you just,
Maybe I missed it. When is it finalized? When do we get the real
We
hard
will
numbers?
close probably in about another 4 weeks.
Mr. Mayor?
Board of Ed is in the process of closing probably next week.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to Ms. Gardner's comments, which were very appropriate and pertinent and right on with respect to gathering things by funds, I have a question is, if you were to aggregate a bunch of this stuff by fund, you could make everything a key account, couldn't you? And then you'd have, you know, a 4 or 5 page overview account.
Bob, I forgot to mention that also Mr. Tetro suggested that we reconcile to the fund actuals by having an all other account, so you can tie that in.
Yeah.
But we're going to keep with our seasonal key accounts thus far, unless there's a problem and you would like to add one, as we did this year with unemployment account.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, for example, you have police, fire, public works, but you don't have public works salary and payroll.
Those are generally not problems.
I know, it's, I mean, but if you had them, I mean, you could add 3 or 4 pages to this, or 2 pages, and by aggregating a bunch of this stuff,
yes.
and have a whole bottom line that just tied out, is what I'm,
That's what we're going to do. We're going to have an all other category, which just sums everything else.
yeah,
So
just,
Did you have something?
If you want to add any other key accounts, please let me know.
yeah, it's just, yeah.
Seeing no other, Mr. Mayor, are you done? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Okay, I guess he moved his mic, he's done. Let me go through the highlights here, I'm going to have some questions. School building grant revenue is $331,000 worse than budget. Is that just a timing issue? Or
It's a timing issue on 132,000. We had budgeted last year, for several years, we were receiving approximately $200,000 annually in progress payments on the smaller projects, which the Board of Education had, the windows at various elementary schools, et cetera, et cetera. We received none of that money this year. And so that $200,000,
are we expecting to see, Paul?
no,
Did
we
put it?
expect to see none of that.
So that sounds like,
And that number has been reduced, that $200,000 in fiscal 12 budget has been eliminated.
okay, but then refresh my memory. We expended these funds. We expected to get the money back from the state for these, so we applied for a grant, we applied for reimbursement. Is that fair? And then all of a sudden they said, yeah, no more?
That part of it's not fair. We had anticipated, or the prior, or the fiscal year 11 budget was constructed on the fact that there would be this $200,000 beyond payments. The other element in this budget is the old pre-1996 payments.
Well, what was the basis for the 200,000? What changed that said we thought we were getting 200,000 and now we didn't get the 200,000?
We thought that there were still projects which the Board of Ed would be filing on, which they would get reimbursement, and there were no filings. The state on this project, on this.
Were there no filings because there's no projects anymore, or were there no filings because we missed the filing date? Or
No, there were no projects, there were no projects.
So we put revenue in the budget last year for projects that didn't exist.
Projects which we had anticipated that they might have projects that would be eligible, which were not eligible. And that there might be some also what I'll call residue from prior years.
So we had projects that we thought would be eligible, and then it was later determined that those projects were not eligible?
Correct.
But those are ones that we approved through bonding resolutions, right?
No, no. Each of these projects, and I give you an example, there's what I'll call the smaller window projects at the elementary schools that were done, are ones that back over the last half a dozen years that there were funds that had been achieved on that. There were some smaller roofing projects that had been,
But were they, how did we pay for those projects? Were they operating budget items, or were they capital or?
mostly capital,
So if they were capital, that means they were bonded capital, or were they?
short-term.
So to my
Bonded,
point,
correct.
when we did the short-term bonding, was it represented to us that we would get some money back from the state, and now we're not getting that?
I
money?
believe so, and I think it's a question as to the timing on that, but there were no funds applied for nor received by the Board of Education.
Can we, this begs the question to go back and look at where we stand on our reimbursements and our bonded projects and our reimbursements. Can we take a look at that?
Sure.
And see where we stand, because we haven't had a report on that in a while. The next item, interest on investments. I'm surprised to see that we're only 150,000 below market here. Like, below budget, rather, yeah. Sorry, because, and Mr. Brockfield and I were talking about this even earlier today, right? Have we marked, does this represent everything being marked to market?
No, does not. This is just the total. We've started that process. I spoke with Mr. Brockfield earlier this evening on that. It does not take the investments marked to market.
So if we take the investments marked to market, do we know how much that's going to be here? An estimate?
I don't know. We don't have, we haven't received, I'm still awaiting one report on one account. Another account we are attempting to reconcile.
So, but it's fair to say that this,
It will be reduced.
it'll be reduced. So did your comments to the rating agency and earlier tonight regarding being 1.5 over on the end
It still nets out from that.
So what's the estimate that we lost here then that helps us get to
I
the
would think in the neighborhood of an additional 200,000.
Okay, so we'll be down, so, and I think currently we're at 850, so we're going to be closer to 650?
650, and also net of the bank charges there. Well, the bank charges were already reflected there.
And that's on a budget of $1 million.
Correct.
And what did we budget for this current fiscal year? Did we keep it at $1 million? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, then.
I have a question on that one.
Sure, please.
I'm just wondering why we say we're 150 below budget due in part to a 126 charge for service. Wouldn't we have budgeted that in? Is that really
No, we have not, this was a discussion we had, and I think it was Mr. Kiley who asked at least identify what the bank
And
charges
I
were.
remember that, but wouldn't we have budgeted in? We know the charge was going to be there, right?
Well, I think we asked, going forward, I think Mr. Kiley asked that there be a separate line
Yeah,
for
that was
fees.
part of the budget discussions.
But that's going forward, but Mr. Brown's point is valid that we were budgeting it supposedly at net, right? Because we knew that fee was going to be charged.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So
Right.
I don't think
we're
we ever
not down
discussed the
because of that. We knew
magnitude.
that was going to happen. That's
Right.
what I'm saying.
I don't think we ever, maybe Paul could correct me, I don't think we ever discussed the magnitude. That number seems high to me as well.
No, that's true, but that number doesn't, well, okay, yeah. Those were my comments on revenue based on this page. And then I went over to the expense line, and I'll go back and open it up to the full board as well. What is the game plan to address this fire overtime issue? Okay, so fire overtime vacancy, we can look at it and say, hey, it's worse than budget for the following 5 reasons, right? But if you turn to the actual detail, that was put together on the spreadsheet attached, or the seasonal report. I very clearly remember, and I'm not going to revisit it too much because it's now 3 or 4 quarters that we've had this conversation. This was another area that we attempted to correct last year by going exactly with what was recommended by the department, particularly in those line items where they said, these are all contractual, right? These 3 overtime line items are contractual. They are what they are. Judge us on this, right? And the only one that wasn't contractual was the vacancy, right? I'm remembering this correctly, right? So, okay. So, we are under in vacation. That makes sense. If you have less positions, you're paying less vacation. We are $80,000 over on sick time, right? Overtime sick time. We're $47,000 over on business, and we're $31,000 over on training. And these represent,
It's that 454 number I think I rolled
yeah,
up before.
but this, on business, we're 20% over.
Correct.
On training, we're 18% over. On sick, we're 20% over.
Under. Oh, over, you're right, sorry.
Right. We're 1% under on vacation. Thank goodness we're 77% under on injury. I'm thrilled for that. But how do we go over on line items that are contractually obligated? I mean, what did we do? And what are we doing to rectify it?
We had last month, I believe, the first selectman and I met with the chief and deputy chief on this problem. I have, at this board and in private meetings, expressed frustration. My concern is that particularly on those lines in which we can control. I mean,
Right.
We can't control injury.
We can't control injury. We have the problem with vacancies.
Right.
Like all the things we talked
Well,
about,
the
right?
vacancy line, though, still is the one that concerns me, because if you look at it, this past year, we spent $645,000.
Right,
We've budgeted for the current year, fiscal '12, $401,000.
right.
And now, granted, part of this 645 is offset by 125,000 in vacancy actual savings.
Right.
But the ladder rescue, which has been frankly, a concern of mine since its inception, has been, it hasn't been controlled, period, in my opinion, as far as the expenditures for those, for that 4-man shift.
Mr.
Well,
Tetra,
can I-
you had your hand up. Do you have any, thank you, Mr. Hiller. I just want to.
When you're
Yeah,
done, I would just like to.
absolutely. I just want
yeah.
both gentlemen to be able to address it.
As Mr. Hiller mentioned, this is a concern. I agree with the comments that were made. We sat down with the fire chief, and I think it's safe to say in no uncertain terms he understands the concerns. I think it's safe to say that we reviewed what this board did the past year to make sure that these accounts were funded to the proper levels as recommended by the management team from the fire department. And this kind of overage on top of that is unacceptable. They're coming back to us with an explanation. They have drafted a report. We need to sit back down with them and review that, and I would be happy to both bring the management team and that report back to this board so we're all clear on what took place.
Thank you, and I would just extend that and say not just what took place, but what's going to change in the future, that we're not going to be sitting here again, because I think all of us went through great pains to take their recommendations and give them exactly what they said was necessary, and then we find ourselves in the same position.
And they doubled it.
I will suggest that point was strongly emphasized to the management team of the fire department.
I think, Mr. DeWitt, you had a
Yeah,
comment
because
on that?
back to the point before on vacancy, okay, we can't control. But if we just look at OT, business and training, I mean, you have a budget, and you know you're at 99%, you stop spending. So all those are, that's $80,000 taken off the table. So we could all sit here and say, oh, the budget's mismanaged. But it's amazing to me how the total number of the department rolls up to 100.7%. That whole budget rolls up to 150%. I'd say, okay, they just mismanaged every line. But Jesus, 100%, almost on the nose for the total. Somebody's looking at line 30, subtracting and adding line 50. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would suggest that's what you're asking them to do. If they're over in some over the course of the year, you're saying make it up in this number. That message got out clearly to the departments. As Mr. Hiller voiced to this group at the April quarterly meeting, when he was very concerned about making a commitment to what the surplus might be at the end of the year.
Yep.
We took that as marching orders back out to the department's heads and said, we need to deliver on that number, and we need to deliver on that number for two reasons. One, because the internal service fund number that we're bringing home was not enough, and we knew that on this board. And going into the rating agency presentation, we wanted to make sure that while we couldn't get it in the internal service fund, we got it in another reserve account in case that came up for discussion. And to that degree, I would compliment the department heads as a group in terms of making sure we delivered on a promise Mr. Hiller was very concerned about making to this board. With respect to the fire department, Mr. DeWitt, I agree with you. There are a number of explanations that some, most definitely, they manage to that number. And if you're over in someplace else, you look for where you can get it up. I think that as I look at it, we can do a much better job of managing the vacancies because at this point in the year, we should know what's vacant. We should also know, based on the cycles of department training and people coming on, we know when they're going to come on. We should also then be able to identify what sort of training, when we're going to have to fill in for them with overtime on the vacancy, when we're going to have to fill in them for overtime on the training, and if there's some additional work on that, we should be able to manage that much closer and make that calculation. And if not, certainly if changes come up during the year, because these things are so calculable, because it basically, if you're not here, you are filling in for him on overtime, all right? And if we're planned on having you in January and you didn't come into March, we'll know that we should be able to plan for that. We should get a much cleaner explanation and calculation of where the overruns are. So to me, this is one big math problem from that standpoint. It shouldn't be quite as hard as it is.
Would you like to?
Yeah, no, but you go ahead, because I got one comment.
Okay. I disagree that this board message back to the fire department was, make sure your whole budget falls out to be 100%. In fact, what I said the exact opposite about the other departments. Why are we not managing to a line item? We're just giving these guys carte blanche and allowing them to run over $400,000 because they know we've budgeted 20 other line items at 20 grand each. So I don't know if that's the right direction to be giving someone.
I don't think that was my point. What I was saying is in reaction to, these overtime accounts came up last October.
Yeah.
All right, when they talked about it, we had so many services we were providing the city of Bridgeport, and that's where they got in trouble on that. All right.
Right.
So a standing guideline to the department heads and has always been to come in within budget. You've heard Rich White talk about what he does to play off against the excess snow removal. Fire department did the same thing. Police department would do the same thing. If they're over in one, they're going to try and come under another. So it's not to manage to 100%, but it's very definitely not to go over and say, hey, sorry, I was over for the first half of the year, nothing I can do about it in the second half of the year.
Right.
So they're very definitely managing to the budget number that we put forward. If they're over in that, they can't go back to that one line item necessarily and change that.
But
the only
they're
place
also
to make it up.
But they're also overrunning line items that they have direct control. I'm with you with the overtime, and Bridgeport needs us 150 times this year. I got it. We haven't accounted for it. But they're overspending on line items they can control. just these two line items, OT, business, and training, it's almost $80,000 that did not need to be spent, except for, the only reason they spent it is because they knew that they had some other account that they could, some other line item to burn that against.
Yep, I would suggest, Mr. DeWitt, that you may want to wait till their explanation before you rush to that judgment. That's all. I think it's a
just
worthy.
kind of the math.
Yep. I think it's a worthy question, and I think the fire department owes you an explanation for that.
That's fair.
Here's, I think, my greater concern with that, and I will certainly wait for an explanation on the overtime accounts and stuff like that, but there's been a pattern here for a few years of this happening. Now, some of that was budgetary error and not budgeting to the appropriate dollar amounts as contractually obligated, okay? But what concerns me more specifically with this particular budget, if you look at their budget, particularly the fire department, I think I did the math, and personnel-related costs at one point are like 94% of their overall budget, something in that neighborhood. It's in the 90 percentile range. So in order to make their budget number, what they're cutting are capital outlay and perhaps safety equipment. So what appears to be a challenge in managing their overtime accounts, for whatever reason, but a challenge in managing their overtime accounts is basically being accounted for by cutting back on expenditures that I'm concerned could impact the quality of their equipment and their safety. Because every time when the fire department comes here year after year, as you know because you've sat here, we get into the discussion about the overtime and the personnel. And then the only other cost in there is how many thermal cameras you're going to buy, how many air tanks you're going to buy, what are you going to do for your new air, what are you going to do for your new equipment, and how are you going to maintain the trucks. And if you look at where they save the money here, to the extent they were able to save the money, that's all the stuff that they didn't spend, particularly the capital outlay. So I sit here and I say, what did we approve? What did we agree to do? What did, for safety considerations, we say that we wanted our guys who are on the front lines to have, that they're not getting because we failed to manage the overtime accounts?
Yep.
And that's what bothers me. That's what concerns me.
And I think your points are well taken. I think, as you described it, I would describe it as that's a reaction. That's not a plan.
Right.
That's, we ended up in trouble over here, and we reacted in terms of what we could. I think that in looking back on that, we've got to go back and get an explanation in terms of what went wrong with the plan, and make sure that doing what you suggested, you know, 1 year may not be as big a glitch. If you do it repeatedly year after year, it would be analogous to the private sector of looking at running over in manufacturing costs and turn around and cutting advertising, because
Well-
that's the one thing you can cut. You do that long enough, your business is out of business.
And I would submit that this is even more dangerous because it's safety equipment. And you know, 2011 wasn't a year where we were particularly fat at letting, you know, extraneous funds go. So we felt, you know, that we were being pretty tight in what we were giving them for safety equipment as it was. I'm just concerned about it. I eagerly await the explanation. I'm withholding judgment on it and all that, but it continues to be an area of concern. So, Mr. Polito.
Yeah, 2 quick points on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I echo Mr. Flynn's concerns about safety, not just with the equipment, but also the safety of the firefighters, because
Well, that's what I
if they're
mean.
that far over on overtime, it means a lot of guys are pulling double time. And I know that they try to manage those things well to make sure guys aren't working shifts that are too long and put their own safety in jeopardy, but it has to be a concern. And I keep going back to the operational audit that we had done, where they recommended that in order to save money in the long run, that we ought to hire more firefighters, which would certainly, you know, speak to increasing safety, but also the fact that even with the upfront costs, they seem to believe that in the long run we would save money that way, and that was diametrically opposed to the way that Chief Fellner talked about it. I think it's something that we really need to investigate in terms of not only saving money, but also having the safest fire department we can, and not putting those guys in danger, working double shifts and, you know, not putting proper attention to equipment. So it's definitely something we need to look at in greater detail and sooner rather than later.
I think, in response, I think, A, that's what we are doing in terms of getting an understanding of what the issues are. We definitely want to define the problem before we solve it.
Yep.
Second, I concur with you on getting an explanation of the trade-off or the analysis between do you hire extra bodies or do you continue to run overtime? And again, I'll go back to Mr. DeWitt asked the question last February. I'm still waiting for the answer. I may be able to affect that a little more from here than I could on the Board of Finance. But we never got a cost explanation. That was a conclusion drawn without any summary of what the cost issues are in terms of what's taken us through that, what's the impact of pension, OPEB, training, and the other components that go within that. I think you have to look at when you bring somebody on, how many vacation days do they get, how many sick days do they get, that all affect that trade-off between straight time and overtime in doing that. So, I totally agree with you that we need to take a look at that. I think step one is to look at what's causing the overtime issue and what took place here. Use that as a learning example of what changes we need to evaluate and what priorities we need to put in. And that may be coming down to hiring more bodies if the costs show that that's the most cost-effective way to go. And certainly concur with both you and Mr. Flynn that safety's got to be a paramount concern in going through all of this.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments based on your read of the reports?
Just for Ms. Gardner, they're giving back vacation. There was an underrun of the vacation line, or was it holiday line, vacation line? Vacation line.
Probably not, because I think, Mr. Flynn, you'd have to look at individual situation, because I think really what it is, that underrun is being generated by the vacancies that existed
Is
within
that
the
vacation? That's what I was
department.
going to ask. That's due to the vacancies.
And that's
All
what I
right.
said, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I
that's
thought
what Tom
Okay,
said.
maybe, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Okay.
No, that's fine, because that's
Because,
what I was
I would
looking
be
at.
really concerned if we were giving back vacation time at straight time, just so everybody could work overtime at time and a half.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Sure, Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's late. I think it's a question for Mr. Hiller. It looks like across the entire budget, the life insurance expense came in like
hasn't been
72%
booked yet.
under.
That hasn't been booked yet from Human Resources. That's
Also,
the
that
one
has not been
benefit
trued
cost
up,
that
so
I-
there's going to be additional expense that hits every
that-
budget?
that-
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments, concerns from board members? Seeing none, anything from the public? Mr. Tetro, any parting words?
No, other than it's been an interesting perspective. This is my first time on this side of your board. So thank you for your kind thoughts and words.
Mr. Hiller, anything?
It is funny that the same confused face when Paul's talking over there is out there now.
No, sir, just, we will get the agenda for next Tuesday evening, should be brief, reasonably brief. There is an item from WPCA. We'll put Mr. Saxel on first, as far as an executive session on the matter that was relating to the pension fund.
Great, I appreciate the time. Everyone, I know it went late tonight, but I think it was a good meeting. I thank you for your time and attention. Do I have a motion? I'm going to go to Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor. There you go. Do I have a second? I'll go over to Mr. DeWitt, who kept us here later. All in favor? Opposed, abstentions? Thank you, everybody. Good night. Linda, thank you.